People on the streets of the bustling city were discussing the upcoming birthday of Mr. Alt, the royal tamer, who was already turning 18, which was definitely an important event for their state. They discuss what ability he will get when he comes of age. However, almost everyone thinks that it will definitely be some good ability because it can't be otherwise. A comfortable life with the gods begins with good skills. Everyone is sure that as long as their master, Alt, is here, this kingdom will definitely be completely safe. However, something is clearly going wrong. Despite the joyful bustle of the residents, Alt learns that from today he will be expelled from the city, which is why he is completely perplexed and shocked. He was driven out not only from the kingdom, but also from the city and even from his own home, where he had grown up until that moment. In this world, upon reaching adulthood, a person receives an important opportunity in everyone's life. The opportunity to choose a unique ability for themselves. The young man who got into such a difficult situation is called Alt, and he works in the kingdom's palace as a monster tamer. He easily finds a common language with these very monsters and even talks, in addition to care and a special approach to each one. Today he turned 18. He chose an ability that angered his father. He loudly asked if this ability really required 1,000,000 gold just to summon a monster. And in the end, it was unknown what kind of monster would drop. Alt Austin put his hands forward in an attempt to defend himself, and told his father that he was the god of gacha. Alta's father didn't believe him at all, to which his son handed him a magic book that evaluates magical abilities so that he could look at the status and make sure that his words were true. Indeed, the book said that this young man was the god of Gach, who could summon a random messenger of a divine attribute to Gach in exchange for gold. And the general skill was the ability to tame monsters, increasing one's abilities. The man didn't believe it at all and angrily reproached the guy for wanting to destroy his Austin family. Pointing his finger right at him, he angrily clenched his son's fist. Sitting down in his place, the father sighed heavily. He remembered that he had a bad feeling, and his son's head was filled only with these monsters. He never thought at all about the county. The young man wanted to justify himself and said that these monsters of the royal court protect the entire city, because it is truly a glorious job, and along with it the Austin house itself. However, his father did not want to listen, because for such money it was possible to build a whole mansion. Then the father asked his son to prove the usefulness of this skill. He ordered to prove that the god summoner skill is really useful. The man ordered to collect all the riches and bring them to Alt. But Alt began to worry that he would not be able to live up to his father's expectations. And then the father said that he would have to simply kick the ungrateful son out of their house. This scared the boy, but he was even more worried about what would happen to the monsters he had been caring for all this time. He knows the characteristics of all the monsters in the royal palace, and if they stop listening to him, he will simply lose his father's trust. But the man reassured his son, because Alta's twin brother Namakel was able to obtain the ability of Dragon Tamer, and therefore with such a skill, all the lower monsters will definitely be in his power. He assured them that they would have an advantage over the surrounding nations, and that with Namakel his county would definitely be safe and sound. A chest filled with gold was thrown in front of the boy, and his father said that there was exactly 1,000,000 gold pieces in it. Alt fell to the floor and was surprised that his brother was a dragon tamer. If the boy was right, if he leaves, then everyone will be in serious danger. But it seems that the father did not think so. The guy looked at his hand and clenched it into a tight fist. He told himself that this was not the end, and he would summon a monster that would be comparable even to a dragon, and then he would be able to protect everyone in this kingdom, because it was his duty. He used his skill with the thought that they would all live in peace. Suddenly, a round platform appeared in the middle of the room, and then magical symbols appeared on it. Everyone in the room was surprised, which made Alt stand up. He looked in surprise at the disc that was hovering above the ground, right in front of him. Suddenly, a huge table appeared, which the young man began to examine carefully. He assumed that the huge table in front of him was simply an instruction manual. Alt's attention was drawn to the note that only the first time he was guaranteed to receive a goddess with an SSR rating, but he did not understand at all what this meant. Alt began to carefully examine the screen, which had pictures of various monsters, and admired them. A hope ran through his mind that he would be able to summon one of these most powerful monsters. After all, if all this is really true and he can summon one of them, then there is still hope. Looking at the gold, he began to ask the god Gacha in order to summon the god. And then a column of light appeared above the huge disc, and light gusts of wind appeared around it. Everyone present was completely perplexed and just silently watched what was happening. The glow intensified and everyone was blinded for a few moments, and then it completely disappeared and only smoke remained, covering something like a wall. The father could not take his eyes off. He was really surprised that his son was able to summon someone. A few moments later, a woman's leg and someone's voice became visible on this platform among the smoke, quiet indignation at the unsuccessful landing. Alt froze in horror, realizing that everything had not gone as he had expected. When the smoke cleared completely, a girl became visible who had no idea how she had ended up there. However, her gaze stopped on Alta. It was Ludia, the SSR-ranked goddess of fertility. The guy was clearly scared that he had summoned a common man, and not one of the monsters on the list that he had seen earlier. The girl's sudden jump frightened the young man even more. She jumped on Alt and screamed that she missed him very much. He himself clearly did not understand anything at all and only became more confused. Smiling brightly, the girl decided to introduce herself and exclaimed that she was Ludia, the goddess of fertility. After that, she hugged the guy again and excitedly shouted that she had been waiting for him to call her, and then asked if everything was okay with him in this world. And Alt still had no idea where this girl knew him from and who she was to him. The strict father interrupted them. The father angrily asked what kind of divine monster had appeared. But before Alt could say a word, the man was already furiously addressing him, even jumping to his feet. He reported that from this moment on the young man must leave this house, not only the house, but also the city. And then, repeating himself, he again voiced his decision to expel the guy from this house and the city. The father gave Alt the border land of Silesia and ordered him not to return until he had justified his name. And then, turning away, he said goodbye to his son who no longer had a home. This is how Alt became exiled from this place and his family. The boy and Ludia were standing on the roof. The boy was completely detached and looking down, lost in thought. He was so deep in his thoughts that he didn't even hear his name being called. When the young man finally turned around and paid attention, the goddess asked him offendedly if he was listening to her at all. It seemed that she was saddened by the guy's sad mood. The tamer asked what had happened to the girl that she was calling him so persistently. However, she noted that he really had not listened to her at all, and then added that he thoughtlessly called people's skills worthless, although they were very good. The guy noted that nothing is perfect, and yet they were talking about his father. The goddess looked away in embarrassment and noted that her interlocutor was too kind to those who did not deserve it at all. But Alt still asked the girl who she was, since she was standing here in front of him with such an air as if everything here belonged to him, and whether she was by any chance a monster. Ludia was very offended by such words. She began to reproach the guy for how he could say such monstrous things to such a beautiful and pretty girl like her. The girl even intended to show the guy herself closer, but he moved away and asked her not to do so. Ludia reminded that she was a goddess who was summoned by the boy's skill called God Gachai. The girl also added that, unfortunately, they had not yet met in this world. Smiling, she said that from now on she would serve Altu as his messenger forever and ever. The young man sighed heavily, and the goddess continued to press. She had already realized that her interlocutor had lost all memories of his previous life, but she was still impatiently waiting for a new meeting with him and even came specially dressed like that. She cried out in inspiration that this was why she got her money for this summoning. And he not only got the opportunity to use her, the super cute goddess, but also inherited some of her abilities. And then she asked the guy to check his status, and then Al took out a magic book, looking at what was written in it in surprise. Under his unique skill was an inscription about a new additional skill called Drops of the World Tree. This skill, inherited from the goddess of fertility, will allow you to produce drops that fully restore XP and MP. Supposedly, anyone can only get one unique skill per person once they reach 18, but that was supposed to be the end of it, until a new skill was added. This skill gives the ability to fully restore XP and MP, as well as heal any wounds and even resurrect, but only within 24 hours after their death. Alt froze in thought, putting his hand to his face. It all seemed simply incredible and amazing to him. Ludia approached the boy and looked at him slyly, asking if the young man was speechless after seeing the skills he had inherited from her. She said that 2,000 years ago the elves paid her a huge tribute to receive a miraculous ability, a drop of the world tree. But 2,000 years ago, there was a terrible war between the 7 great demon kings, which did not pass without a trace. All the gods lost their power and fell into a deep sleep. However, Ludia revealed that there was a trump card to restore all the gods, and this was the ability entrusted to Altu, god of Gachai. Hearing this, the guy was terribly surprised. He did not understand how his ability could be so important. The young man looked away and admitted that the scale of this was too great, and he himself was no longer a nobleman. He could not even return to his city, and therefore did not understand what a man like him could do. Smiling, he remembered that his brother was able to gain strong skills, so Alt could just go to Silesia and live there peacefully without returning home. The young man stretched tiredly to stretch his back and admitted that he had worked all his life, So this was even a good opportunity, because now he had freedom. Now he could finally do whatever he wanted. And yet their conversation was interrupted. Alt froze, looking at something below. Something on the street caught his eye. It was a huge wolf that was attacking the people of this city. People were running away in panic, but they could do nothing, only helplessly screaming for someone to call adventurers to get rid of such a problem. Ludia, noticing this, screamed in horror and fear. The monster growled, looking around as if choosing a victim to attack. And the next moment the monster rushed towards the crowd of people, who immediately scattered in panic in different directions. Alt immediately noticed this and watched carefully. And indeed, while people were running away in panic, some were covering each other and the children. This monster furiously attacked them, scratching them with its claws. The guy was terribly frightened and upset by such a sight. The goddess immediately noticed how the young man's hands began to shake. The girl asked her interlocutor, upset, how he felt and if everything was okay. However, he did not answer and clenched his teeth furiously, as if he was about to do something. He apologized to Ludia and jumped over the railing and rushed towards the creature. Jumping down and going down the stairs, he approached the monster, who was already about to attack one of the residents. Alt jumped on the wolf's back and, holding on tightly, furiously ordered him to stop. The people standing nearby were terribly frightened and surprised by such an act of the guy. The young man moved forward and grabbed the creature by the mouth, squeezing the monster's jaw so that it would no longer frighten other people, and then again gave the order to be quiet, be a good boy and sit down. The monster desperately tried to unclench its jaw, growling and struggling angrily, and then Alt pressed its head to the ground. He shouted loudly, looking the monster in the eye, that everything was fine and they were on the same side, and therefore no one would harm the creature. However, this did not convince the dog, and he continued to aggressively break free and growl, showing hostility. And yet Alt did not give up. He continued to squeeze the dog's head tightly and convince him that he would protect him. And then the dog gradually began to relax and lie down completely on the ground. The monster continued to growl, but much more calmly, but Alt still did not let him go. The young man, noticing that the creature began to calm down, smiled, and the people around only froze in amazement, watching from the side. The guy freed one hand, reached into his bag and took out a strange bundle, which he began to untie with his teeth. It was a huge piece of meat, which the guy put near the animal's mouth and clarified that he was probably hungry, and therefore he could eat and calm down. And then Alt asked the white wolf to finally come to his senses and not do stupid things. The monster greedily pounced on the piece of meat, and the young man noted that he knew that the problem was precisely in the animal's hunger. Alt continued to watch the white wolf, but suddenly Ludia ran up to him in a hurry, shouting that there was a wounded man there. There was a crowd of people gathered around something on the street. There was a girl lying in the center of the crowd. People around her tried to stop the bleeding, but it was of little use. This girl had hit her head too hard and was still unconscious, so even recovery magic couldn't help. Next to the girl sat her child and cried, begging his mother to wake up, while the woman simply continued to lie bleeding. Alt approached and was horrified when he saw the state of the wounded woman. The people who tried to help the girl quickly recognized Master Alt, the royal tamer. The young man ordered everyone to calm down, but the people continued to discuss the fact that the wolf monster was on the loose. The boy quickly realized that the girl was seriously injured and also unconscious. Alt wondered if they would even let him into the palace, but it was worth a try. Meanwhile, the child continued to burst into tears. The guy jumped up and shouted that he would call the courtyard magician, and if the adventurers could not use their magic, then they could use their skills, and therefore let them prepare bandages and water. One man said that his shop was around the corner and so he could take care of the Veda, while another shouted that he had a first aid kit at home. As Alt was running towards the palace, Ludia grabbed him by the arm to stop him. The girl persistently asked Alta to wait, and then she added that he had no reason to run to the palace, because he could do everything himself. Not understanding what the goddess was saying, the guy turned to her in surprise without saying a word. He turned his gaze to the people who were looking expectantly at Alt, and then the girl's son said what was on everyone's minds. The child said that he had heard that today was the birthday of the son of the Austin family. Ludia clenched her fists and looked resolutely at the young man, urging him to trust his skills, which he decided to do. Taking a step towards the wounded woman, he raised his hand to his chest and asked the people to allow him to do so. Alt crouched over the sick woman and stretched out his hands, while everyone else watched frozen. The young man himself seemed to be asking someone and hoping that his skills would be useful. He called upon a drop from the world tree, and a pair of drops formed under his outstretched hands. Small drops fell on the wounded woman's face, slowly running down her cheeks. After a few moments, a soft, pleasant light appeared and spread throughout the area. The child who had been crying earlier froze in amazement, watching everything that was happening. The The bright light spread smoothly throughout the girl's body. Even Alt himself was surprised watching the warm light that he created himself. The blood gradually began to disappear, and the girl's wounds simply closed and tightened, which surprised everyone nearby. Even Alt himself looked surprised, as if he hadn't expected this. The woman slowly opened her eyes and then stood up as if nothing had happened. She herself did not even understand what was happening, while the people around her were shouting joyfully. The child rushed into his mother's arms, and everyone around was sure that it was a miracle. Alt froze, realizing that he had been able to do what he had planned. Ludia walked up to the guy who was sitting down not far from what happened and happily looking at his hands. He was definitely delighted. The girl breathed a sigh of relief when she saw that everything was fine. People began to discuss that all this was possible thanks to Master Alt's skills. He definitely had good skills. And besides, he was able to tame the dangerous white wolf, for which they were grateful. The monster lowered its ears and tail and looked at Alt pitifully, as if realizing its mistake and asking for forgiveness. The guy assured him that everything was fine now and there was no reason to worry or get upset. The guys went out of the gate and Alt noted that he was very happy about such a good day. However, Ludia was worried about the guy and asked if he was sure that he wanted to leave this city, to which the guy answered that in any case he was already expelled from there and therefore nothing could be done. Suddenly the white wolf howled pitifully, drawing attention to himself. Alt turned to the wolf and said that he would call him Snowball because he was all white. The goddess, examining the monster's fur, noted that it was incredibly cute and fluffy. However, her emotions quickly changed to irritation. The girl did not understand how the former tamer could just abandon this white wolf. What do they even think about monsters? It was so disappointing to her. She sat down next to the monster and said that she was very sorry, but Snowball's new owner was a very good person, which was definitely true. Hearing this, the dog barked loudly in response. Then the goddess noticed that their pet was already happy. And recalling what had happened recently, she noted that his proper apologies to the child and mother were simply excellent. Alt noted that the problem was that this wolf was hungry. Ludia added that this dog really does look too skinny, as if it hadn't been eating properly. The young man said that now everything will be fine with the wolf, because he does not want this to happen to everyone, not just to Snowball, and therefore he is ready to try his best. The goddess asked in surprise what Alt meant by these words. Then he told her that maybe it was okay to have monsters on your side, but if they met them face to face, he was sure that they would succeed. What happened today reminded Alt of a very important dream. He remembered that he wanted to create a paradise where all monsters could live freely, and a paradise where they could be happy living together with humans. The young man really wanted everyone to get along together. It really was his dream. Ludia was surprised to hear this. After these words, the dog happily licked his new owner, and Alt himself noted that all this was only thanks to Ludia. The girl tilted her head in surprise and asked why the young man was saying that. The guy explained that time, she said that he could do everything himself and would definitely cope. The result was that he was able to save the mother of that child. And in the end, even Snowball was forgiven for his misdeed. That's how Alt realized his dream. He admitted that it was all thanks to Ludia and the skills she gave the guy, and then sincerely thanked her. The girl was embarrassed by such statements and even blushed. She didn't even know what to say to Alt's gratitude and nervously tried to find the right words. And then suddenly she asked to hug the guy directly, asking what he was talking about. He was so sweet, so it was natural that she had to help him. Now Alt was the one who couldn't find a place for himself. The girl jumped into the guy's arms and persistently asked what else he wanted from her. Alt awkwardly tried to explain that everything was fine and he just wanted to thank the goddess for everything she had done, and then in desperation asked Snowball for help. A little later, when the boys had calmed down, they were ready to set out to explore Silesia and build a city there, as well as face new unimaginable difficulties. The young man asked if Ludia would go with them. Clenching her fists, the girl replied that she was definitely going with them and that it didn't even need to be said, because she and Alt were engaged, and therefore she would do everything possible to help him wherever he went. The Austin family's tamer thanked the goddess and they set off. Although he noted that he did not understand at all what the girl meant by the words about engagement, since he had not yet made any promises to anyone. Ludia only impatiently asked the guy to remember something important. And so these three finally set off for Silesia, anticipating a fun journey. After some time, the sun had already set and was replaced by the moon, brightly illuminating the dark forest. The boys had gotten tired while walking, and so Alt suggested that they stop and rest here today, to which everyone agreed. The young man thanked Snowball for helping them on their journey, as he had been carrying the boys on his back almost the entire way. And Rudia, without missing an opportunity, pressed herself tightly against Alt so that he would not fall along the way. The goddess noted that she couldn't even believe how much Alt liked Snowball, and then noted that the guy really did seem like a good tamer. Her companion replied that good was putting it mildly, and they had only met today. Rudia indignantly asked why he decided that they had only met today since they had been friends for 2,000 years. And in general, she knew more about Alta than he did. Looking for something, and the young man turned away so as not to see anything unnecessary, asking what she was doing again. But suddenly the goddess took out a small magic stone, saying that it was a sacred stone, which was given as a bonus for entry. When Alt picked up the stone, he began to examine it and asked again, "What is the entry bonus?" Rudia folded her hands dreamily and replied that it was her love in crystallized form. And if the young man accumulated 5 such stones, he would be able to launch God Gacha once. She noted that the guy should be amazed by the beauty of her love. But the young man was thinking about something completely different, and therefore clarified that if he had this, then it turned out that he did not need 1,000,000 gold coins at all. Rudia replied, "That's true, but he can summon at R rarity and below without paying for it." Alt noted that even such a rank is great, but the girl noted that if they accumulate 1,000,000 gold, then SSR rank will become available to them. Alt thought about it and refused to take the stone and decided to use it to pay for that time. However, this did not suit the goddess at all, who admitted that she was so happy to see Alt today that she was able to produce 3 stones instead of 1. The girl fell hysterically to the floor and nervously screamed that the young man should take more from her, while he convinced her that there was simply no need for this. A little later, when the girl had already calmed down, the Alt said that he was going to get ready for bed. Rudia, who had just been standing on her hands, made a serious face and turned to her companion with a question. Does he know who the Demon King is? Not hearing an answer, she decided to tell him that he is the Demon King of this world, the ruler, and the leader of evil. And the only way to resurrect the sealed gods before the Demon Lord appears is to mock the gods. She turned around sharply and asked to take them to save this world. However, no one listened to the girl anymore because her companion was sleeping soundly lying on the tail of a white wolf. 2 days later, the Rabatas were still continuing their journey to the lands of Silesia, traveling on the snow. They were already at the entrance to their destination, a village called the Sea of Demons, and the village of pioneers should be nearby, which is why Alt asked everyone to be on guard. And not in vain, because he himself noticed something that surprised him very much. The village in front of them was half destroyed. The houses were broken and damaged, and only splinters remained of the gate. If you look closely, you can see that there was a battle going on right now. Goblins were attacking this village, trying to set fire to houses and take away everything valuable that they could. Meanwhile, people were trying to fight back at any cost. Rudia asked worriedly, what should they do since goblins are demons, meaning they cannot be tamed even with his skills? Still, the young man understood that they needed to somehow get rid of the attackers. He ordered Rudia to hide in the thicket of trees and not come out until everything was over, not even listening to her words about what he was going to do being very dangerous. Alt quickly noticed the goblin standing on the stairs and determined that it was their leader, because he had a crown on his head, and therefore ordered Snowball to run straight towards him. The young man cut the ladder and ordered the goblins to stop. The leader of the opponents said that it was very dangerous and asked if it was really a villager in front of him. However, the goblin leader could not accept this, and therefore ordered everyone to attack this guy because he was hunting for their leader. However, Alt did not even think of stopping and swung to strike. Then, quickly resolving the situation, the head of the goblins took the little girl hostage and threatened that they could get rid of the entire village. And then Alt was afraid to continue the attack and ordered the wolf to retreat. But it was all a well-thought-out move, and a bow was already aimed at the young man who was trying to decide what would be the right thing to do. Only Rudia managed to notice and tried to warn him. However, the guy did not pay attention and Alt's hand was hit by the weapon and he was unable to stay on his feet and fell. The goblins, noticing this, immediately rushed to attack while their enemy was lying on the ground. Snowball noticed this too, and baring his teeth, he rushed to help his master. He quickly circled around the young man, not giving anyone a chance to approach or somehow touch the summoner. The goblins continued to set everything on fire, and had already reached the tower while the people were desperately trying to escape. Rudia watched the whole thing from the sidelines in fear. The goblins were robbing people's houses, taking everything of value that caught their eye. They intended to take the villagers captive after stealing everything of value, and they wanted to start with the young people. The girl could no longer silently watch everything that was happening, and so she shouted loudly, trying to draw Alt's attention to herself. But not only the young man noticed the goddess, but also the goblins, and so they decided to capture her first. Full of determination and not paying attention to her opponents, She asked the guy to use the power of gacha. She loudly declared that gacha is not just a billing skill. It is a power that makes both people and God happy and is meant for the common good. The young man remembered his strength and that Ludia gave him a bonus for entering. He threw 5 sacred stones, invoking his ability and using his skill. A magic circle appeared floating in the air, followed by a pillar of bright light, after which Gachai's skill was successfully activated. Instead of the magic circle used for summoning, a huge dragon stood there in just a few moments. It was a rare divine dragon of R-rank Bahamut. He bent one knee, kicking up clouds of dust beneath his paws. The goblins and humans stood there, gaping in amazement. The creature bowed its head and said that it had come here through a divine call and immediately asked for permission to destroy the enemies of its master Alt with all the power it had. The young man froze in surprise, looking straight at Bahamut. He recalled, the divine dragon seemed to have once been recognized as the strongest creature created by the creator god to confront the demon king. And while he was thinking, the dragon was already accumulating magic power in its mouth. The young man rushed to the dragon, begging him not to accumulate such power and to wait a little, because there was a hostage there. However, it seemed that the creature was already impossible to stop. The dragon said that everyone could be sure that his divine fire breath could destroy only those fools who oppose his master. The entire area along with the lowly goblins would be destroyed. Hearing this, the monsters fell to their knees begging the ferocious creature for forgiveness. Yet Bahamut was unyielding, for all who had pointed their sword at his master would pay for it. When the dragon was about to attack, Alt ordered him to stop. And when everyone was ready to take a cruel blow, the guy desperately shouted an order to the dragon to disappear. Then he obediently evaporated, leaving only emptiness in the air. The young man breathed a sigh of relief, and in his hands appeared something small and smoking. It was Bahamut's card, which had some information about him and his rank. Having read it carefully, the young man turned to the goblins who had attacked him earlier, who were sitting on their knees, having thrown down their weapons. When they noticed the young man's gaze, they placed the crown in front of him and, having bowed to the floor, congratulated him on his return. A little time passed and the sounds of battle could no longer be heard in the air, which already made Alt happy. He looked closely at the card he had recently received after the dragon left. Ludia had pointed out that it was a card for carrying summoned monsters, which surprised Alt, and he asked if he really had to carry the card. The fertility goddess explained that this was exactly it. The god of Gachai does not stop after being summoned. The boy can summon creatures again and again. However, there was an important but. The young man looked at the card and noticed that under the picture it was written that 100 MP was required for the call and 1 MP per minute to maintain the call. He immediately realized that his maximum amount of MP was 120, which was clearly not enough, because a lot of magic was needed. The girl put her arm around the guy's shoulders and said that it was very important to know where to call, and then added that the restoration was complete. The guy thanked her and noted that he had forgotten about his companion's ability to use drops of the world tree. When Ludia explained that this was her goddess power before, Alt asked if she could also become a card in that case. The goddess admitted that this was true, however, she wanted to remain in this form as long as possible and had the skill of independent actions. And then, clinging to the guy, the girl added that she would be terribly upset if he made a map out of her. Alt understood her words, her desires, and sincerely thanked her for her help. The girl, slightly embarrassed, asked if that was all, but she did not have time to hear the young man's answer. She was interrupted by a creature standing next to her. The monster asked what will happen to them now. They did not even think that Alt had such power. The young man admitted that he had no intention of destroying the goblins, but if they continued to attack his village, it would be a completely different story. Although, even if they didn't, they had already destroyed and stolen so much. The goblin took out the chest, and moving it said that they were very sorry and they were ready to pay them for everything they took, but not with their lives. Alt took advantage of the situation and asked if they were ready to help in that case, to which they agreed. Alt and Ludia exchanged joyful glances, and then the young man shouted loudly to attract the attention of both goblins and humans. Everyone turned around in surprise and looked at the boy. He introduced himself as Alt Austin, and assured that he had been appointed by the Lord to turn this land into a rich city where monsters and humans could coexist peacefully and profitably for each other. The villagers excitedly chatted among themselves, recognizing the boy as the king's tamer, and then realized that the dragon they had just seen belonged to Master Alt. The young man added that the goblins had just surrendered and would not fight. He shouted that they promised to do everything in their power for a bright future and development of this small town. From now on, they are all friends and will build this city together. One of the goblins noted, assuring everyone that all the money that was stolen was in place. There was about 1,000,000 gold. However, when Alt turned around, he saw that Ludia had already grabbed the chest tightly, not wanting to give it up. She shouted that the young man should use this money to use the god gacha and nothing else. She explained that if he paid for gacha, he would be able to summon even more amazing SR plus gods than Bahamut. He could even get a super talented god of her class. Alt was completely shocked by this behavior of his companion. He noted that this was the villager's money, and he planned to earn money through his labor, developing and improving. Ludia cried, not wanting to give up the gold she had received, but her reasoning was interrupted by one of the villagers. Someone was shouting loudly that the fire was still burning, and if it continued, it would spread to the forest. The goblin grabbed his head and apologized, and then ordered everyone to quickly collect water from the river to put it out. However, Ludia noticed such a wonderful opportunity and noted that with the power of Master Alt, one can calmly put out the fire, and he can easily solve this problem in the blink of an eye. The guy himself only froze in misunderstanding. The girl explained that he should use his Bahamut skills properly. The young man quickly understood what was being talked about because he had received the Divine Flame skill, the ability to burn only a specific target. The young man asked everyone to move away from the fire, and when the villagers stood behind him, he announced that he was starting to use the Divine Flame skill. Streams of magic headed straight for the burning town. In an instant, the magic seemed to absorb the fire, leaving behind only steam and smoke, which dissipated just as quickly. The residents began to rejoice joyfully because there was no more fire, which meant their homes were safe. Ludia and Alt were also delighted and rejoiced along with the others. Meanwhile, far from this place, in the very dungeon of Purgatory, someone was indignantly shouting that it was too hot here. This loud guy is Count Namical Austin. He was chewing something, but sweat was literally running down his face. Then someone who was with him reported that they had heard about the heat in this place. However, the Count indignantly began to vent his anger on the girl. Having scolded his companion for not being energetic enough and blowing cold air on him too badly, he climbed higher up the mountains. Having climbed a little, he loudly shouted that all these adventurers were simply useless. A little later, he asked whether Bahamut, whom they were looking for, had arrived or not. Then one of those who accompanied him answered the Count that the dragon should be here any minute. A deep breath, Namical demanded that they show him the way, insulting his companions in the process. But then he quickly misspoke and asked them to wait with a sly face, as if he had something in mind. He approached the mage, the smallest girl among them, and hugged her, assuring her that she should carry him since he was a nobleman with the strongest dragon tamer skill. But the sorceress herself was definitely not delighted and cried out in pain. Her comrades quickly stood up for her and demanded that she not do this, because she did not like it. One of the guys sat down with his head bowed and said that if the Count was tired, he could take on the role of the girl and carry him. However, Namical was only furious at such statements and, striking the young man with a whip, shouted how such commoners dared to challenge him. The adventurer lost his balance and fell to the ground from the strong blow. The sorceress rushed to her brother saying that all this was just terrible. Then the guy tried to calm Rin down, assuring that everything was fine. The Count jumped onto a higher ledge and laughed, ordering his companions to do as he said, because they were in a very difficult dungeon with a danger level of S, and therefore they should not quarrel among themselves. Then one of the adventurers grinned viciously and said that if the Count continued to pester them and behave in this manner towards them, especially towards Rin, then he would definitely report it to the Adventurers Guild. Namical mimicked asking who wanted to inform on him, and then hitting the plebe company, he shouted that he would simply kick them all out of the guild. He threatened that he was even capable of such a thing, because he was from the Austin family and had power. The adventurers accompanying the boy noted with disappointment that his brother, Master Alt, had become a great dragon tamer, so they did not expect such behavior from his twin. The Count's son's face twisted with rage. He asked again, what was it they had told him anyway? But suddenly the strife was interrupted by someone whose menacing voice echoed around the area. The unknown person noted that he was not happy with the fools trampling on his sanctuary. Namical turned around to see Bahamut, the divine dragon, standing behind him. The creature glared at the intruders and loomed menacingly over them as it flew. The boy shouted loudly to the creature that he was Namical Austin, the great dragon tamer, and that he had come here to become the master of Bahamut, and he clenched his fist furiously. He demanded that the divine dragon obey him. The state was completely shocked by such impudence. The dragon turned and asked if this impudent youth really thought he was his master. He couldn't contain his anger and growled loudly that all this was just ridiculous and that this man should know his place. After that, he simply threw the guy off the cliff and he screamed in horror as he fell down. He fell and landed face down on a rock. When he got up, he noticed that his nose was bleeding. His companions rushed to the Count to check if he was alive and how he was feeling. The young man rolled on the ground, screaming loudly and demanding that they do something about this problem already. One of the adventurers demanded that the Count calm down and assured that they would stop the bleeding right away. But it was not so important because there was a much more serious problem. Bahamut gathered his power into a fireball and prepared to strike. The adventurer team noticed this without thinking twice, sent them running, because they simply couldn't stand still waiting for the dragon's attack to hit them too. The Count, crawling on the ground, ordered to wait for him. They couldn't just leave him here. When Rin said that they couldn't just leave their customer, but he was beyond help. The young man burst into tears and screamed that he was Namakel Austin, and therefore they had to save him. The dragon laughed, assuring him that he was terribly pathetic because even his own comrades had abandoned him. The Count could only press himself to the ground, cover his head with his hands, and scream loudly. When the blow he expected did not come, then Namakel, confused, raised his head and saw that Bahamut had stopped gathering his forces for the attack. The dragon said that his true master had summoned him, and so he was leaving. The divine being noted that the dragon's master had saved the life of this pathetic human. The boy continued to look up, tears and blood flowing, and then asked if this dragon had just been summoned by a summoner. He smiled and added that it was simply impossible, because even with his skills he couldn't just summon a dragon. Who could do something like that? Brother Alta didn't even suspect. The dragon flew away and the adventurers ran away, and so Namakel was left sitting all alone in the emptiness of the mountains. He wondered who could be capable of such a thing. At that time, he did not know anything. Thanks to the brilliant idea of using dragons to control monsters. Unfortunately, a dark cloud hung over Alt's head, although he didn't even suspect anything yet. Neither about his brother's affairs, nor about the fact that the monsters of the royal court, having lost Alt, have already begun to express their discontent. Which, of course, can definitely bring inevitable death to the Austin family. Alt meanwhile recalled the words of his father, who said that the young man could not worry, because his brother, who had received the skill of taming dragons, Namakel, was here. Fragments of phrases about Alt being banished, and if it was possible to control dragons, then it was possible to control lower creatures, popped into the guy's head, causing a sad smile. He sighed heavily, noting that even though he had been expelled, he had still been able to reach the village given to him, and he even liked it there. As a result, the night after the goblin attack, the village held a welcoming party for Alt and his group. Goblins and humans were having fun together, dancing around the fire and enjoying food and drinks. As if there had been no hostility before, they could sit side by side and talk calmly. The young man wondered how, apart from rebuilding the village and providing all its inhabitants with food, humans and goblins could celebrate something together and make so much noise. Alt was interrupted from his thoughts by an old man offering him something. The residents happily chatted about what had happened recently. Some were surprised that even the dragon was under the control of this guy, others thanked him for his help and salvation. There were even those who thought that since the goblins were no longer their enemies, there was definitely hope in this world. And when Altu was poured some sake into his glass, he admitted that he didn't know what to say to everything that was said. The guy was sure that he was just lucky. He believed that Ludia and Bahamut coming to his aid was all the result of his luck from the skill he chose from God Gacha. Then the young man was brought a dish with meat on it. It was worth trying before it had time to cool down. Alt immediately noted that it looked very tasty. He put a piece in his mouth and chewed it and said that he liked it very much. But he still noticed something strange. The dish had no taste at all, and there was definitely no salt or pepper used in the preparation. If you look closely, this soup was full of venison that the goblins gave them, but there were almost no vegetables. He turned to the girl who brought the soup and told her that she had made a very tasty dish. However, he immediately noticed that she did not look very good, her fingers were bandaged, and the girl herself was dressed in a cheap, shabby dress. Looking around and then into his glass, Alt quickly realized that because of the cheap alcohol, everyone was getting drunk very quickly, and that was why there was so much noise around. The boy smiled and decidedly realized that he still had a lot of work to do in this village. Suddenly, someone called Alt's name very loudly. It was Ludia, who hugged the summoner and snatched the bottle and continued to exclaim. She asked why he still didn't start turning down all the girls standing around. She turned around and shouted that she was this guy's wife, and if they dared to touch him, she would never forgive them. The Alt himself asked when they managed to get married. The man sitting next to him said that he couldn't even imagine where Alt got such a beautiful wife from, and then asked when the young man had managed to hit on her. Ludia covered her drooping face with her hands and noted that she had just been called a beautiful wife, and she felt awkward when she heard the truth. The guy just turned away and noted that the story somehow developed on its own. Then Ludia pounded her chest with her fist and promised that in the name of the goddess of fertility she would bring a bountiful harvest to this village, surprising everyone present. After these words of hers, the company went beyond the celebration and approached the berry tree. Its fruits could be used as material for healing medicines, but the trees do not bloom since the land is not at all fertile. Extended her hand towards the tree and suggested that they begin. Her gaze was full of determination, as if she had something in mind that would surprise everyone. When she reached her hand out to the branch, she used a spell that covered the tree branch with bright light. And as soon as the girl removed her hand, those present saw berries behind it. Alt and the others began to examine the unknown fruits on the tree, which had grown in a couple of moments. Everyone who came immediately rushed to try the new fruits, of course asking beforehand whether these yanods were edible at all. The young man, having tried one berry, noted with admiration that it was impossible. He immediately felt the power filling his body and noted the good quality of this fruit. Goblins and people also noted that it was very tasty, and they even found it hard to believe that trees could bear such juicy fruits. Alt noticed that these berries had a healing effect even if they were simply eaten without any processing. Yes, this is simply an indispensable item for adventurers, so the guy asked Ludia how often she could do this. The goddess thought that this could not be done too often. The trees would quickly get tired and the land would become infertile. She said with a smile that this could be done once every 10 days, which definitely surprised the summoner. A joyful Ludia exclaimed that she had the power to control plants, but there was no point in letting plants grow out of season. Alt noted that Ludia could indeed be a god, but this only angered the girl, and she screamed loudly that she was already a goddess. People joyfully began to shout in honor of Ludia, however. The girl herself asked to worship Altu more than her. Approaching the guy, she put her hand on him and said that he was the savior chosen by the creator god. The young man only modestly replied that the girl was exaggerating again, after which he took a sip of the delicious drink with a smile. Looking at the berry that remained in his hands, he was glad that the big problem of this village was suddenly solved thanks to Ludia. This was determined to be a good start. The next day, work on something was already completed. It turned out that the guys had already managed to build a kennel for Snezhak. It turned out to be a wonderful home for the guard dog of the village of Alta. Snowball himself was also delighted, and turning to his owner, he happily thanked him for the new home, and to the surprise of even Alt himself, he understood the dog's words perfectly. In the magic book that showed the abilities, it was written that the tamer's skills had increased, and now Alt could understand the language of monsters. While the young man was carefully studying his new ability and reading the explanations, Snowball informed him that it was getting hot outside, and therefore he would like to have his hair cut. The young man agreed and decided that they should try to cut the dog's hair. Alt found out that the tools were in the backyard and went there with his pet. And after a while, Snowball already had a new haircut, which would make him feel less hot. When the work was finished, Alt decided that they might even be able to sell the wool, so he carefully collected it and wrapped it in cloth. Meanwhile, children approached the dog and asked to ride on his back. Snowball happily agreed and did so, saying something. The young man standing next to him conveyed to the others the dog's intention to protect everyone in this village. Alt, having removed the wool, went to clean up the tools with which he had trimmed the huge dog. And when he had already finished cleaning, Ludia called out to him, saying that guests had arrived. The Inyu traders greeted Alta and Ludia and the rest of the villagers with joy. The goddess asked who was in front of them, to which one of the boys explained that he was an honest trader who wags his tail when he is happy. The new head of this village shook the paw of the merchant and thanked them for coming to this remote area and greeted them joyfully. He also did not forget to introduce himself as Alt Austin, the new lord of Silesia. After everyone had met and greeted each other, they started talking about business. Alt asked if they could buy food for the monsters next time and sell it. The merchant said that they could definitely provide such a possibility and asked how much they needed. The boy explained that he wanted to order the highest quality food, like the royal suppliers, for 100,000 gold. To the merchant's surprise, he told them that they would have more monsters in the future and he wanted them to have a good life. The merchant bowed his head, saying that he understood everything. Alt also added that he wanted to ask him to buy something. There were 2 open boxes on the ground. One of them contained medicinal berries and the other contained white wolf fur. The merchant surrounded the boxes, carefully examining the goods. They really liked the color and shine of the wool as well as the effect of the berries. Noting that there were 3 boxes of goods each, the merchant assured that they were ready to buy everything, which clearly surprised Alt. One of the merchants explained that these berries were of high quality at this time of year, and the wool could be expected to have high protective power. Alt bowed respectfully and thanked his interlocutor. Laughed happily because for them it was a very profitable deal. Ludia only silently watched the parties, not expecting that they would find a common language so easily. The merchant noted that it was nice to have out-of-season berries, and the offer of monster food suited him. but he was still haunted by the question of who this person was in front of them. He especially didn't believe that goblins could be so friendly. Then one of these same goblins who was standing nearby asked if the merchant didn't know something important. He told them that Austin was a famous aristocrat, the king's monster tamer. Hearing this information, the merchants were extremely excited because Austin herself was an indispensable customer with the highest priority, so they had to leave Alt happy. The young man awkwardly ran his hand through his hair and admitted that he had almost completely lost touch with his parents' home. And although they called him an aristocrat, it was still only in name. He added that when he turned 18 and the skills he had acquired were not very good, according to the head of the Austin family, he was simply exiled to this land. So he thinks it will be difficult to establish contact with the Austin family. Then the merchant smiled and said that although they did not know the circumstances, they would still like to have a personal relationship with Mr. Alt. After all, in their opinion, he could very well turn Silesia into a rich territory, and they have eyes to see it. Alt only awkwardly thanked him for the pleasant words. A little later, the guys went into the forest discussing the recent meeting with the traders. The merchant seemed good-natured to everyone, and the berry sales were very pleasing, because with this amount you can earn a good amount and promote gacha. Alt thanked Ludia for the fact that now you don't have to worry about food. After all, thanks to her, a field was created on which signs of the village's development are visible. When there is time, he will definitely try the paid gacha again. Hearing this, the goddess asked again whether Alt was serious about saying this. She joyfully rushed to hug the guy, assuring him that she loved him. From such unexpected actions, the young man even blushed and jerked awkwardly. The young man remembered that a lot had happened during this time, and besides, just yesterday the girl had asked him to sleep with her, although Alt had strenuously refused. Goblin noted that Ludia was terribly clingy, which of course angered the girl, and she screamed loudly, and then asked how he could say something so rude. And while they were bickering, Alt asked Snowball what he found. He asked if the white wolf smelled honey, because it was very important for them to find honeycombs in this forest. While the goblins were wondering if they were really looking for honey, Ludia, who had managed to fall behind Alt, rushed to him, assuring him that she loved sweets very much. The young man said that the people of Inu gave him this idea. While they were still in the village, the boy asked the merchant if he had any industry in mind. Alt explained that he wanted to cook something that could become the signature dish of the place. The merchant thought about it seriously, and then the person standing next to him suggested that they think about a honey bear, which really seemed like a good idea. Alt was surprised to ask if this bear really existed, to which they told him where to look for it. The merchant admitted that they had never been to that area themselves, but had heard a lot from adventurers who had passed through there. He also added that if the boys could tame it, they would definitely have a big industry waiting for them, and then asked when they could finish producing their special products to let them buy it. Ludia asked in surprise if that was why they came to the forest. Alt explained that their target was the honey bear, because forest bears love honey and have a habit of hoarding it, and the honey they collect only gets sweeter. The goblins and Ludia were very surprised after hearing this. And Alt also added that all the honey used in the royal confectionery comes from these bears. The goddess immediately became interested in this topic, and asked if they could then prepare a variety of delicious cakes and sweets. The young man explained that if things went well, they would be able to sell this honey, and therefore it was important for them to tame such a bear. The girl was already going through in her head the many sweets she would like to eat. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by Snowball, who said that he smelled a sweet smell. Following the trail, the company came to a flower meadow that looked simply mesmerizing. And when they looked a little closer, they found a large beehive on one of the trees nearby. For this find, Ald stroked the white wolf and praised him for his excellent work. Meanwhile, Ludia decided to get the honey herself, despite the goblin's attempts to dissuade her. The girl smiled and assured that bees are the descendants of the goddess of fertility. If she had known earlier, she would have been glad to share honey with everyone. The goblins asked if the purpose of their journey was not to tame the bear, but the girl did not listen to them. Approaching the hive, the girl leaned over and, with a smile, asked the bees to give her just a minute, and then said that she would like to get just a little bit of honey. However, the bees were not so happy about this meeting, and one of them immediately removed the girl right in the nose. The goddess screamed loudly from pain and anger. She definitely did not expect this. She instantly ran away from the swarm of evil insects, and at that moment Alt noticed her, who was perplexed and surprised by the girl's stupid act. Tired of running around the flower field, Ludia asked the young man to help her and use the divine flame skill. The guy froze in bewilderment. He did not expect to meet attacking bees. Without thinking twice, he asked the white wolf to go help Ludia. The pet quickly picked up the girl on his back, helping her escape from the aggressive attacking bees, who were simply trying to protect their honey from unexpected guests. Rudia and Snezhka ran further into the forest to escape the attacking insects, and Alt and the goblins decided to catch up with them by making a detour. Later, the guys were able to reunite. The goddess looked in the mirror with tears in her eyes, not understanding why this was happening. The girl's nose was very swollen and red, which definitely upset her. Alt only quietly said that they didn't even come here for honey. The goblins discussed how honey collected and stored by a bear was much sweeter, which meant that the goddess's action definitely made no sense. The girl just sat there hiding her face, and Alt tried to calm her down somehow. Suddenly, Snowball called everyone to look at the flower garden where Rudia was attacked. A huge bear with a pot in his teeth walked carefully towards that very hive. It was the same honey bear that the boys had come here for. He sat down opposite the hive, carefully holding his pot and growled softly, looking straight at the bees. Having looked closely, the boys realized that in front of them was a honey bear, who was carrying something in his paws that looked very much like a pot. It looked somewhat like a raccoon, but it didn't look like what they had imagined. Alt noted that it was indeed a real honey bear and then, stretching out his hand, pointed to the object in its paws. It was a huge honey vat, which had already cracked over the long period of its use. The goblins looked at the bear in amazement. He collected honey in this vat and then took it to himself. The company decided to see how he did it, and then they became quiet so as not to attract attention to themselves. The bear, surrounded by bees, swung his paw and growled loudly, wishing himself a bon appetit. He stuck his hand into the hive and started to get honey, and the bees had already surrounded him and were trying to defend themselves. And while the insects were stinging him, he didn't even flinch. It turned out that his fur was scaring the bees away. After a short observation, Alt boldly crawled out of hiding with the thought that he should tame the honey bear. But such an act frightened the goddess, and she screamed that it was dangerous, although she had done the same thing earlier. The guy loudly called the bear and attracted its attention. The bear turned his head and looked at the one calling him. The young man took out a huge vat and said that it was much stronger than the one the bear was holding in his hands. And then he promised that he would give it to the creature if it became his familiar. Miss Ka was clearly interested and ran closer to see what they were offering him. Alt decided to demonstrate that even if you drop this vat, it won't break. It was a special vat purchased from the Inyu tribe, and magic was applied to it so that it would not break even if dropped or hit. The young man thought that it was indeed a good idea to buy this vat earlier. Honey Bear ran up to Altu and burst into tears, telling him that he really wanted this vat, because he was so sad when he broke his honey pot last time. Alta's company continued to watch from the ambush, and the guys noted that apparently the bear and the guy can understand each other, which means the young man can talk normally with this creature. The tamer's level has increased. Alt meanwhile continued to persuade the honey bear. He understood it and realized that for him, a pot of honey was nothing. He said they could provide a safe place to sleep and 3 meals of the highest quality every day, and then asked what his interlocutor thought about this. Miss Ka, looking at his new vat, admitted that this offer was quite good, and with this pot he would quickly be able to find himself a wife. Even the team in ambush saw the bear's promising smile. The bear and Alt shook hands, and the first said that he would rely on the other. Then the young man thanked him for his trust. He turned to those waiting for him and made a gesture that confirmed with words that he had succeeded. Everyone was delighted, because the guy had tamed the bear simply by talking to him, and now they would have honey. The young man told the creature that he was very happy to be friends with him, and then asked if it was possible to get some honey for his village. The bear confirmed that it was, and added that it was possible to collect a lot of honey. Meanwhile, someone was watching everything from a tree. The unknown man screamed loudly and jumped down, aiming his sword straight at Alt's new friend. Everyone froze in horror. It seems no one expected this. However, when the sharp blade was already close, a goblin appeared in the air, covering the bear with his shield. This time, the attacker was surprised. He even asked if someone was really going to interfere with his hunt. Then another goblin shouted that they were strengthening their defenses, and all three lined up around Alt and their new friend. The guy menacingly declared that he had just tamed this bear, and therefore it belonged to them. It seems that out of fear or surprise, the bear touched his old vat with his paw and it fell apart. He asked them to stop attacking them. And while the bear thanked his saviors, the man asked irritably if he really had a boy tamer in front of him, and one who hid in the shadows and stole other people's profits. He shouted loudly that he hated people like him and rushed into battle. The goblins, of course, asked not to talk to their master like that and boldly began to defend him. But the man, calling them simply small fry, scattered them in different directions. The goblins were defeated and lay on the grass, trying to recover from the wounds they had received. The man laughed at the fact that the guy in front of him was such a great tamer that even goblins followed him. And then, getting ready to leave, He shouted that later he would find out where the treasure was and would definitely come for it. Ludia ran out of hiding and asked how the boys were feeling. The girl looked at the man with surprise and at the same time with irritation and asked who it was. Having looked around carefully, the man explained that he was here for bear honey and the goblin treasure. And then he clarified whether this girl was attached to the treasure. Ludia was seriously angry, and the man was just surprised that this young man could even have such a beautiful girlfriend. Alt quickly realized that this guy was not one of those he could talk to, and so he immediately took up his sword. With a serious face, Alt drew his weapon and held it forward, saying that if this man was going to harm his friends or Ludia, he could not even count on mercy. Throwing his sword over his back, the blonde man asked if this guy knew who was standing in front of him. It was the swordsman, Gain, and part-time A-rank adventurer. He swung his sword and rushed towards Alt, loudly asking if this tamer had enough courage to go against someone like him. Alt managed to defend himself with his sword, and the sound of breaking steel deafened everyone for a moment. Jane continued to attack, daring the guy to do something, and then noted that he was not even fighting at full strength yet. It seemed the man was already expecting the guy to lose and was smiling maliciously. The adventurer threatened that he was going to embarrass the young man in front of his beautiful companion and take off all his clothes, humiliating the guy with this gesture. Snowball resolutely rushed to help his master, but Alt did not allow the dog to come closer and ordered him to retreat and stay away, because it was very dangerous. The boy stretched out his hand and used the divine flame skill. Magic power instantly concentrated around his hand, which could even be seen. The man was surprised and asked what kind of magical effect it was. However, the flames enveloped his weapon and even the strong metal could not withstand the magical fire and simply burned, right in the hands of the adventurer, causing him to freeze in amazement. Pulling himself together, the man raised his fist to strike. He noted that this was not just a tamer, so he asked who this guy was. Alt summoned Bahamut. The sky and earth seemed to shake from the emerging power and the huge creature that appeared right in front of Hein. A huge and terrifying dragon appeared as if from nowhere, forcing the enemy to recoil and retreat back. The man could not even stay on his feet and almost lost his balance. He was completely horrified by what he saw and could only ask, "What is it?" The dragon calmly looked around and then began to watch the man closely, saying that if someone opposed his master, then he must disappear. Alt shouted that he just wanted to strip the man of his armor. Bahamut said that he understood everything and began to carry out the order. The man only looked at his opponent in horror, not understanding how everything turned out this way. He covered himself with his hands in a desperate attempt to save himself and protect himself. The dragon leaned slightly and opened its mouth, spewing flames directly at Alt's opponent, who only screamed in horror. The man who was confident of his victory lost all his armor and shouted loudly that he did not like all this and did not understand what kind of power this was. However, when he rose from his knees, he noticed that he was no longer wearing clothes and was indignant only about this. There was a dead silence in the air. The man stood silently, looking at his opponent and his terrifying dragon. Alt also waited quietly for Gain to calm down. The young man noted that if someone lost his weapon and armor, then he no longer had a chance to win, and therefore the man should humbly surrender and admit defeat. Gain fell to his knees again and hitting his forehead on the ground, admitted that he was definitely giving up now. Alt was even surprised by such abruptness, but Bahamut, on the contrary, as if he was used to such things, did not react at all. Finally, having sorted out all the problems, the guys returned home taking their new friend. The residents were already happily greeting Alt and Ludia and asking how they were doing, at first not noticing the new resident at all. The man approached the group and handed them something. He offered to look at Alta, which they had grown in one day, and bragged that it even tasted great. And then he asked how they were doing and whether they had managed to tame the honey bear. The young man confirmed that everything worked out, and it seemed that the bear even liked the hollows on the edge of their village. When the honey bear saw this tree and the hollow in it, he immediately assured that he was going to collect honey here, after which he smiled. Alt noted that the bear was useful to them, and now he could start working on village dishes, to which the bear assured that everything was mutual. He admitted that he no longer feels lonely here, because he has Snowball and other different friends, and therefore he is looking forward to the opportunity to live here. The worker noted that rumors of Alt being the tamer of the royal palace had reached the outlying areas, but everything was as expected. The boy thanked everyone for their cooperation. Then Jane noted that he was surprised by the boy's ability to talk to monsters. When one of the residents asked who this man was, he silently turned in the opposite direction. People began to talk about how they were seeing him for the first time and that he looked like a suspicious person. Jane tried to justify himself. He assured with a serious face that he was now the new vassal of Lord Alt Jane. However, Ludia interrupted him and told him that the man attacked them in the forest, and from the looks of it, he was an A-rank adventurer. The girl said that they were able to fight him off only thanks to Alt's skills. She recalled how earlier Jane apologized for his behavior, assuring that he did not know that he was a nobleman, and then begged to be made Alt's vassal. The young man himself promised to think about it, because the population of their village was still very small. The village has a population of about 150 people, including goblins, but there is a severe shortage of labor. There are other powerful monsters in the forest, such as the dark elves. Human resources that can become a force are welcome. Even the goblins agreed and said that if Alt says so, they will accept it. Alt says that even though he is a vassal, he is underpaid. The other guy says that Alt will achieve great success someday and that it is a blessing to sit on the ass of a winning horse. The girl does not believe it. The girl asks the guy if he is really an adventurer and not just a bandit. The guy says no way. A man appears and shouts if it is Jane. The man says he won't confuse that voice with anyone else. Jane is surprised that the guy is from the hotel, and the man shouts that the guy didn't pay for the room and alcohol. The man continues to shout that Jane was dating his daughter, and the boy was told never to come to that village again. The boy, sitting on his knees, denies it, but then apologizes and says he did wrong. Jane asks for forgiveness and says he will cry. The girl standing behind him smiles and looks at him. The girl asks what the guy lied about. Hein asks what the girl is smiling about. She continues to exclaim that he got the reward he deserved if he didn't even return the money to the old man. The people who came up are surprised to hear about the reward. Ludia, smiling, tells Gain to pay a fine of 100,000 gold. The guy is surprised. The guy asks about the fine and says that his actions and this price are disproportionate. Ludia is indignant. The girl, looking angrily, says that if the criminal became a vassal of Alta and was not punished. Jane asks in shock if he is a criminal. Ludia replies that if it is wrong, should she call the goblins and the bear. The girl continues to tell that the boy tried to kill a cute bear, chased away goblins and pointed a sword at Alt, and also spent money on accommodation and attacked her. The men looked at Hein with an angry and threatening look. Ludia, sitting down and looking at the guy, says that the guy paid, otherwise she will throw him in jail. Alt says that the girl has gone too far. The girl, sighing, says that she needs money for Alt's dream. The hero doesn't even know which of them is the villain. Jane says that he understands. The guy, sitting on the ground, replies that he did something bad to the old man, so let him be the scapegoat and pay for it with bloodletting. Jane puts the bag of money on the ground. Ludia, throwing money around, rejoices and tells Altu that they returned the money that Inu paid them, and now he will be able to pay for the gacha. The girl asks if it is possible to return the stolen money after the end of the gacha. She is told that yes. The main character is asked if she is the devil incarnate. Alt says that if the village develops, then the salary will be increased. Alt sighs and says that he will then take this opportunity and pay for it, and summons the god of Gachai. The old man asks Jane if he has learned his lesson. The boy says yes. The people are wondering who will be called next. There are many people standing around the circle. Goblin puts down a chest of money. Hero says there's about 900,000 gold left. Alt pours coins from his bag into the chest and says there's 1 million gold. Guy adds that including Jane's money. The protagonist, looking at the open chest, says that these are almost all of his assets, and thinks that it takes courage to throw it all away. Alt thinks that if a creature like Ludia or Bahamut appears, it will pay off well. People are watching. Hero says we'll see and summons a charge, insert 1 million gold. The protagonist calls the gacha to open. A pillar of light hits the circle. Jane is surprised. The children are also surprised by the light. Ludia says that she appeared and she is here. Alt looks at the circle in surprise. There is a sound near the circle. The hero, Gain, goblins, and humans look at the circle. Smoke flies out of the circle. A hand holding a wooden bucket appears. Ludia is surprised. Kyuzuha, holding a wooden bucket of bathing accessories in one hand, the goddess of hot springs, says she has arrived. Her rarity is SR. Kyuzuka, clutching the bucket with her hands, asks the hero if he is her owner. Ludia is surprised to meet Kyuzuha for the first time in 2,000 years. The goddess of hot springs is also surprised to meet Ludia. Gain asks if the girls know each other. Ludia, hugging her, explains that Kyuzuha is her vassal goddess, and she is like a younger sister to her. The girl asks the goddess of hot springs to spread the wonders of the hot springs from this village throughout the world. Kyuzuha says, "Long live the hot spring." Alt looks at her in surprise. Kyuzuha asks to see her power. The earth begins to shake, and the protagonist is surprised and asks if it is an earthquake. Ludia happily answers that it is not. The girl replies that it is a new friend. Water erupts from underground. The people standing around look at it in surprise. People are surprised that 3 columns of water appear near wooden houses. Jane says the water is too hot. Alt says it's not water, it's hot springs. Kyuzuha laughs, holding his hands to his mouth. The goddess says that if you are under the influence of a hot spring, your mana and health will be restored, and your stats will double for 24 hours. Jane is surprised and says that this is a colossal effect. Alt agrees with him and opens the status window. A window pops up with doubled stats, and the main character is surprised. The villagers are happy about the increased stats, saying they feel 10 years younger and the boost effect is unimaginable. Jane says he was stupid to level up by fighting. Kyuzuha explains that the springs heal everything except a heart broken by love. The boy suggests making the village a place where everyone can heal their wounds or safely level up. The goddess agrees. Standing underwater, the goblins say that they can create an impregnable fortress here and that the water is so pleasant. The boy exclaims that with the right skill, you can even resist a dragon. Alt asks if the source can be used to heal monsters' wounds. Kyuzuha replies that it can. Ludia says that these springs are loved by the gods, so even humans and monsters can benefit from them, and that Kyuzuha is almost like a sister to her. The girl hugging Kyuzuha says to see the power of the goddesses from the gacha, and also asks if it is scary. The protagonist is happy and says that he is scared, not the word, and it seems he understood the merits of paying for gacha and thanks Ludia. The girl blushes. The girl says with disgust that this is already a mixed open-air bath. Kyuzuha says that this is no longer curable. Alt is glad that the power of the spring affects Snezhak as well. The dog says that the pond looks good. The goddess tells Altu that she is going to build a hot spring inn and attract many customers, and make the place famous. The protagonist said that they should share the duties of the free, follow Kyuzuha's instructions, and make this in the dignity of the village. Ludia agreed, the others also agreed. Alt said that he would ask the bear. A bear appears, Alt and Ludia are surprised, the bear points at them. The bear makes sounds, the hero translates and says that the bear said to rely on him. The residents are surprised by the change in character. Alt says that it is decided and it is time to get down to business. The whole village started building a hotel. In the royal capital Adventurers Guild, a boy shouts at her to ask if she is joking. The girl replies that Mr. Austin has committed a serious breach of the terms and she cannot introduce adventurers to the boy. S-rank adventurer Wolf of Dawn, who was introduced earlier, was subjected to cruel treatment. She was beaten with a whip and forced to carry a boy on her back. The boy says that she did not do everything properly. The girl says that such behavior in a dangerous dungeon is outrageous, and the guild refuses to introduce adventurers to Mr. Namakel. The guy shouts that he is Namakel, the tamer of the royal palace, and if the girl goes against him, then she will go against the kingdom. The girl explains that the Adventurers Guild is a supranational organization, meaning they are independent from the kingdom and do not have to obey the orders of the nobility. The guy looks at her angrily. Namakel laughs and asks if the girl understands what she said. If this continues, the monsters kept in the royal palace will get out of control and start causing a lot of trouble. The girl asks if it is true that Namakel is the heir to the prestigious family of tamers of Count Austin. She also asks if taming monsters isn't for food. Namakel replies that he is, and he thinks so, because he always left his brother to take care of the monsters, and his tamer level is level 1. The guardian is attacked by monsters that are angry in the royal palace. The boy wonders if he can use his natural power to control the monster if his brother's power is completely gone. The guy thinks that he needs to tame the dragon and suppress the monsters as soon as possible. A female silhouette angrily shouts what the Austin family is doing, that their noble title will be taken away from them. The boy cries and thinks that the Austin family is destroyed. He tells the girl that he is in a hurry and wants to tame the dragon immediately. The girl says that Mr. Namakel will still be banned from entering the Adventurers Guild and asks him to leave. The guy shouts that he has money, any amount of money, and remembers that there were adventurers who would do dirty work for a certain amount of money, and also heard that there was an A-rank adventurer named Jane. The girl says that the Adventurers Guild won't take on such a thing and that Jane has gone to Silesia. Namakel shouts that in this world, money and power decide everything and asks what this is. The guy throws coins at the girl and continues to shout that wouldn't the woman be happy if her partner was an influential and rich man. He says she has a lot of money and orders her to call Hein. The woman's face lights up with anger. She screams that her patience has run out and asks the two guys to get Namakel out of her sight. The guy is dragged out into the street and shouts what they are doing. The men ask the guy to leave. Namakel leaves but says that this is not the end, that there is nothing in the guild but trash and he will burn it down with the help of his dragon. Someone's hand falls on the guy's shoulder. The guy turns around but is punched in the face. A group of people shout in anger that they heard the conversation inside and know that the guy was pestering Rin from the Wolf of Dawn. They continue to shout for Namekal not to insult adventurers and that they love Rin. People say that one blow is not enough and who will accept a request from such a person. Namekal was expelled from the guild and is against adventurers. The man asks if the girl is okay and asks for restoration magic. Nearby, they try to calm down an angry animal. The girl asks who the current tamer is. The man replies that Namekal is from Earl Austin's family. The girl with blood on her hand orders him to call the palace. 3 days later, Alt says he feels well and is returning to life. The hero is surprised that they were able to build the hotel so quickly and says that the stars are beautiful. Kyuzuha exclaims that this is why the hot springs are the best. Alt is surprised by her appearance. The goddess explains that mixed bathing is common in the ancient world, as hot springs were places where men and women would socialize. The protagonist exclaims that she is in a bathing suit. Kyuzuha asks what is wrong with him. The goddess says that the boy has a bright red face. Alt explains that he is a little dizzy. Kyuzuha pulls the hero out of the spring and says that he needs to lie down because the rush of blood can lead to death. Ludia comes and invites Alto to go swimming together. The girl sees Kyuzuka with the hero and angrily asks what he was going to do. The goddess says she was delighted. The protagonist does not understand what she is talking about. Ludia looks at them angrily and rushes at the protagonist with a bucket in her hands. The girl hits Alt in the solar plexus. The heroes begin to fall. Kyuzuha shouts that it is dangerous. The main character and the girls are lying in the water, and the bucket fell on the head of the dog, who is also sitting in the water. Kyuzuha says that the floor in the bathhouse is slippery and that they need to be careful. Ludia replies that she will be careful. Alt agrees with her. The protagonist says that there was a misunderstanding. Ludia says that she understands and forgives him. Alt wonders what kind of relationship they have. The hero asks if they built a bathhouse for women. They answer that they built bathhouses for both women and men. Kyuzuka says that this is a special bathhouse for service personnel. The goddess jokes about Alt and Ludia having children. The girl tells Kyuzuha to stop. Kyuzuha hopes that the number of clients will now increase and asks Alta to tame the buffalo. The goddess says that drinking milk after bathing is a proven way to enjoy the springs. Kyuzuka says that they need to get milk. The hero says that this sounds familiar to him. The protagonist explains that the buffalo is a cow-type monster, capable of producing milk of the highest quality. Alt says that milk can also be used to make sweets. The goddess replies that she knows all about hot springs. The protagonist thinks that taming a buffalo will help the village become richer and more pleasant and says that he must try. The dog and the bear are also sitting in the hot springs. The hotel with the springs is built. Alt and his friends are trying to tame the buffalo. Progress is growing. The goblin asks the hero how he likes the shoes and says that they focused on ease of movement. Alt, looking at the new shoes, replies that the boots fit well and can be used both in the field and in the forest. Jane apologizes for making his clothes look so nondescript. The protagonist says it's okay and he's looking forward to the guy showing him where the Moo Moo buffalo lives. Jane agrees. Alt and his friends successfully built a hotel with hot springs and at the request of Kyuzuka, who wanted milk, they went to look for the buffalo Mew Mew in the forest. In the forest, Alt and Ludia are riding a dog and Hein is walking ahead. The hero wonders what it's like to need a buffalo's chest. Some sounds are heard in the grass. Monsters are running across the grass. Ludia is shocked. Jane hits the monsters with his sword and the monsters retreat. The girl asks if they are buffalo. Alt replies that they are just ordinary monsters. Ludia says that Jane can be trusted. He knows the way and will help. The dog agrees and adds that even though he was bad at the beginning. The guy, bending his shoulders, answers that his abilities have increased and it's all thanks to the hot springs. Alt asks him not to tear his clothes. The protagonist says that Silesia reminds him of a garden where one can stroll carefree. The dog says that it is indeed easy to walk here. Ludia happily asks Hein if it's not amazing to know the whole forest. The guy replies that he only knows some places. The girl calls out to Alt, who is sitting in front. The girl treats the hero to cookies made from honey that the honey bear collected for them, asks him to open his mouth and asks how it is. Alt replies that it is delicious. The girl is happy to hear this as she baked the cookies herself and says that she also has juice with honey. The protagonist says that it is all delicious, but the girl's face is too close to him. Jane laughs at the whole situation. The boy says he's jealous of Mrs. Ludia and Alt's closeness. The dog says he wouldn't mind a cookie either. The protagonist says it's more like a picnic and asks to take a break if there's a suitable place. Hein says that the habitat of the Mew Mew buffalo is nearby. Alt and his friends hear a girl scream. The hero calls Snowball. The dog says to leave it to him. Approaching, Alt and Ludia see a man with a spear riding on a beast. A girl with a frightened expression on her face sits next to a tree. The heroes came closer. The unknown man runs at the girl with a spear and screams for her to die. The girl closes her eyes in fear. Alt wonders if this man's beast is a buffalo. The protagonist releases divine flame at the unknown man. The fire destroys the spear. The man is surprised. Alt says that he is the master of this place and will not allow anyone to act willfully here. The stranger shouts in anger that he will not forgive the hero and asks Alt if he is trying to stop him. The protagonist asks to wait and offers to talk. Snowball tells the heroes to hold on tight. The buffalo breathes angrily. Snowball and the beast collide head-on. Applying force, the dog throws the beast back. The stranger cannot believe it. The beast, losing consciousness, pins the man to the ground, and he cannot believe how the hero managed to knock down his buffalo Mumu. Ludia angrily shouts that as a goddess she cannot forgive the words of a man who wished death on an unknown girl. Alt offers the Mew Mew buffalo to follow him. The buffalo looks at the hero. The stranger yells at the beast why it is not moving and orders it to stand up. The buffalo bows to the hero. The men are surprised that control has been taken away from him. Alt says that the unknown man did not always treat the beast with love. The man shouts that the protagonist is stupid and that dark elves are known as natural tamers. The hero notes that the elf looks like a human and a 9th-level tamer. The elf notices the angry look of the protagonist and wonders if he is from Austin's family and why the tamer of the kingdom is in such a place. The man says that he was just one step away from defeating the princess. Ludia asks in surprise about the princess. The unknown girl turns out to be an elven princess. The dark elf confirms this and says that the heroes are involved in a conflict between elves that has been going on for over 2,000 years. He shouts that because of other elves, the dark elves are enemies. The man tells the heroes to get ready. 3 assistants arrive to tell the main man that they have finally caught up with him and ask if he killed Princess Tio. The elf and his army say that something bad has happened, and now he will bury the heroes and the princess together. The hero asks Ludia to heal the princess. The girl agrees and begins healing. The main character also asks Snowball to protect the girls. The guy introduces himself as Lord Alt Austin of Silesia and says that he will not tolerate conflict in this forest. Alt asks the elves to stop their attacks and offers to talk. The elf asks what the hero is going to do alone and says that there is no time for talking. He gives his men the order to attack the main character. Lord Austin says he is not alone. Gain swings his sword. The other elves are surprised. Gain raises his sword and says that he is a swordsman serving Lord Alt, and asks the dark elves to remember this. The hero, raising his hand up, activates the skill healing steam, inherited from Kuzuha. Steam appears around Alt. He says that the target is his friends and asks to double the characteristic. The elves do not understand what blinds them. The dark elves are surprised by Gain's appearance and ask if this is the same Gain, the cheater and money-obsessed womanizer. The guy is insulted. The chief elf, covering his eyes with his hand from the steam flying towards him, orders not to panic and to aim first at the princess. As the steam recedes, Alt appears, his hand clenched into a fist, ready to strike at the enemy. The dark elf is surprised. The main character's system window appears with doubled stats. Alt strikes the dark elf. The main character hits the dark elf. He flies away. His assistants are surprised that he flew away. Alt is also surprised because he just wanted to immobilize the enemy. Snowball, grabbing the enemy by the cloak, throws the elf back. The other, in fear, points a spear at the dog. The dark elves run away in fear and shout who the heroes are, what kind of strange power they have, and are they really invulnerable. Ludia praises Snowball. Buffalo says that Snowball is cool. The head elf fires a magic arrow and says that if only he could return with the princess's blood. Tio is horrified. Alt uses the Divine Flame skill, and behind him, Jane raises his sword and prepares to fight. Divine Flame destroys the magic arrow. The hero asks that the arrow has disappeared, but the silhouette of the arrow is visible. He thinks that it is useless and takes a leaf out of his jacket. Alt summons Bahamut and shouts for him to appear. A pillar of light appears behind him. A huge dragon appears behind the hero, looking at the main character. The elves found themselves on the ground due to the power of this dragon. Bahamut tells the dark elves that it would be foolish to disobey his master. The princess looks at the dragon in surprise, and Ludia is happy about his appearance. The elves, seeing the dragon, prepare to retreat. The dark elves retreat. Alt and his friends watch them go. Jane thanks the dragon. He says he hasn't done anything yet and asks the boy whose side he is on. Jane replies that he is on their side and is a vassal of Lord Alt. Ludia laughs. The hero feeds the buffalo. The princess addresses the heroes. The girl bows and says that although she doesn't know who they are, she thanks them for their help. She says that her name is Tio and she is an elven princess. Tio asks if they are people. The protagonist introduces himself as Alt Austin from Silesia and says that they are his friends. Alt kneels, bows his head, and says he is glad the princess is safe. The girl blushes and calls out to Alta. Ludia comes to a realization. She tells the princess that Alt is her husband and that she should not try to ensnare him. Tio does not understand what she is talking about. The hero asks Ludia to stop and asks when they managed to get married. The girl says that the hero is her husband. The protagonist asks the princess if she can come to the village to talk to them. Gain says there is delicious food and hot springs. Tio agrees. Alt asks Mew Mew to come with them too. The buffalo thanks them. The princess also expresses her gratitude for their kindness. The heroes stand in the forest. At the Austin mansion, a hand knocks on the door. A guy orders you to come in. A young girl dressed as a maid enters with a cake in her hand and asks for forgiveness. She is hit on the hand with a whip. The girl falls from the blow. The guy angrily shouts that why does she need so much time to prepare one strawberry cake. The girl starts apologizing. The girl introduces herself as Lilina and tells that she was born into a poor lower-class noble family and always worked as a maid in the Earl Austin family. In those happy days when Mr. Alt was supposed to become the next head, Lilina goes on to say that Mr. Alt was a very kind person and it was a nice place to work, and that she felt happy working for him. The boy was angry, and the girl holding the cake raised her head and thought that Mr. Namakel was chosen as the head of the family after acquiring the dragon tamer skill. The maid tells that Mr. Alt was banished, and since the hero disappeared, Mr. Namakel has become a tyrant. Namakel says that he feels nostalgic for the days when Alt was around and cursed the adventurers who beat him. The guy says that all the adventurers are charged with insulting the Royal Highness and assaulting him. People said that they hurt him and are ready to go to prison. Namakel asks the maid if anyone was caught. Lilina says no and continues that the adventurers who disrespected Lord Namakel seem to have left the capital for fear of retribution. The boy has ordered that they be caught. Lilina says that His Excellency the leader has stated that he does not intend to create any further problems. The boy shouts that he is the one the commoners are laughing at and he will have to retreat. Namakel asks if they have found any other dungeons in the country where dragons live, and says that if he does not tame one soon, he will become incompetent. The girl tells that there is a dragon hotel not far from the border, which has been known since ancient times as the home of dragons. The guy starts shouting that it is a mountain 9,000 meters high and how he can get to the dragon nest. Lilina apologizes. The maid suggests taming the dragon lizard since it is the weakest dragon-type monster, and some say that they live in the grass so it won't be hard to come across them. The guy sitting on the bed says that there is no point in taming them and no point in bragging about it, and orders the girl to bring strawberry cake and feed him. The maid took a plate with cake and a fork. Namakel orders her to be kind like his mother, to make him say ah 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 and to let him eat cake. The girl feeding the boy thinks that if she had known that something like this would happen, she would have followed Mr. Alt to the outskirts. She heard that the outskirts were a terrible place, full of evil monsters and demons, and it was her mistake not to go. After all, from now on, the girl will have to serve Lord Namakel for the rest of her life, and this does not look like a happy future. She thinks about Alta. Lilina wonders where Alt is and realizes that he was her paradise and wants to go to him right now. The girl holds a strawberry cake with a fork. Someone bursts into Mr. Namakel's chambers and calls him. A guy sitting on a bed asks what is needed. There is a strawberry cake on the nightstand next to the bed. A man comes and says that a messenger from the royal palace has arrived. The man reveals that the monster in the royal palace apparently bit Her Royal Highness Princess Anne on the hand. Namakel and Lilina are very surprised by this news. He says that Her Royal Highness Princess Anne seems to be very angry, so Lord Namakel has been ordered to come to the royal palace immediately and explain himself. The boy is frightened and the maid is shocked. Her Royal Highness Princess Anne is a ruthless woman known as the Ice Princess. The guy thinks things weren't supposed to be this way. Namakel thinks that it was necessary to tame the strongest divine dragon Bahamut in the Dungeon of Purgatory, and Princess Anna would say great. And in the end she would get married and he would rule this country. That's the dream he had. Approaching the door, the guy introduces himself as Namakel Austin. The door opens. Ice Princess Anna is sitting on a chair. She asks the guy if he is listening to her. Namakel thinks about Princess Anna. She shows him her bandaged hand and says that it was bitten by a unicorn. The princess notes that if Alt was a tamer, this would not have happened and tells the boy that he is not following the instructions for caring for monsters. The girl asks if this means that Earl Austin's family intends to rebel against the royal family. The boy, kneeling, replies that he has been working hard for the past few days to tame the dragon. The boy says that as a result he has become somewhat dismissive of himself. The princess, tilting her head, asks where the important dragon is. Namekal nervously does not answer. Her Royal Highness Princess Anne says that the boy has given up on controlling monsters, but there are still no results. She also heard that he is having problems with the Adventurers Guild and asks what he is doing. Namekal, kneeling and placing his hand on his chest, apologizes and promises that he will definitely show results in the near future. Anna says that then the guy should do it immediately, and he knows how cruel she is to those who are not hers. The girl, looking at the guy, says that she is beginning to think about depriving Namekal of the role of the royal tamer. The guy tries to justify himself. The princess, throwing up her hands, says that she is disappointed in him and had high hopes for him, and asks why Count Austin's family exiled Alt to the outskirts. The girl continues to tell the boy that there are voices everywhere that he lacks power, and she agrees with them. Namekal apologizes and says he is sorry. The princess says that the boy will be further disgraced if she uses her power to bring Alt back as the tamer of the royal palace, and is considering deporting Namekal and his children from the country, and says that he is free. The guy holding his hand to his chest knelt down. Namekal angrily says that the hero is just an amateur. Clenching his fist in anger, he thinks to himself that the princess wants them to die in the wild. The man hands the princess a paper. Anna says that interesting reports have come from the settlers of Silesia. She says that Lord Alt Austin is using the divine dragon Bahamut as a summoned beast. Her Royal Highness continues to explain that even goblins are under the control of this power. Namekal is shocked, because even his ultimate skill, Dragon Tamer, could not subdue the summoned Bahamut. The boy recalls that firstly his brother is a tamer, not a summoner, and at that time the dragon said that it seemed to be summoned by its true master. The girl said that now she confirms the truth of this question. The princess says that if this is true, her father will choose Alta as her fiancé, because the royal family needs strong heroes to fight other countries. Namekal is surprised that his brother is the princess's fiancé. The guy falls to his knees and screams why, and while crying, he thinks that it shouldn't have happened this way. He thinks he is a real hero who should tame the dragon, and the monsters should follow him and the princess should marry him. But he says that the only thing he needs is to control the monsters in the royal palace. Namekal screams and angrily hits the stone tile with his hands. The princess says that she has had enough of the boy and asks him to leave. The boy, sitting on the floor and looking down, says that he takes this to heart. The door closes, but only the princess is visible, sitting at the table and resting her chin on her hands. The question is asked, how did this happen? A crescent moon is visible in the sky. The man, with a glass of wine in his hand, says that it was a lot of effort and thinks that Princess Anna Alt liked it more than she expected. The servant bows and prepares to close the door. A man with black hair and a beard asks if the hero has tamed Bahamut and says it is hard to believe. He goes on to say that the status of the Austin family is at stake, and if Alt returns, he and Namekal will be exiled. The man, with his hands on the table where there is a box of chocolates and a newspaper, says that this is the end for him. He says that he is retired and has maids that he likes. He drinks wine and wonders where he went wrong. He thought that Namekal's Dragon Tamer was a skill that allowed him to unconditionally subjugate dragons, but the boy failed to tame the divine dragon Bahamut. The man wonders if Dragon Tamer is the skill they were expecting, if this type of skill is affected by the tamer's base skill. He thinks that Alt can't have such outstanding skills. The man is worried. The wine flows out of the glass. The glass of wine, filled to the brim, remains on the table. The man takes it and drinks from the bottle, cursing. He remembers hearing that Namekal can no longer hire adventurers as he has been blocked from everywhere. The old man places the bottle on the table, sighs and says that he has no choice but to go and do something about it. But that is impossible since he has been absent from the scene for a long time, and this only buys time. He says that Alt is the only one who understands the nature and personalities of over 1,000 different monsters, and that he knows the characteristics of all the monsters in the royal palace. The man regrets and realizes that Alt was more suited to Earl Austin's family. He asks what he should do. The current head of the family is worried. 2 days later, Dorian receives an unexpected letter from Alt on the outskirts. Mountains, forest, and wooden buildings surrounded by a fence are visible. Princess Tio asks that there are no people there. Ludia sits behind and Alt and Hein walk next to her. The elf is surprised that there are goblins there. The goblins see the heroes and wave their hands joyfully. Jane says that the princess is surprised because Mr. Alt is the strongest tamer who can even take control of monsters. Ludia adds that the hero is the only person who can do this. Alt feels awkward from their praise. Tio, seeing a human interacting with a goblin, cannot believe that goblins live alongside humans, since according to elven folklore, demons only obey the demon lord. She asks the hero who he is. Alt says that the elves were scared when they saw Bahamut. The elf asks who Bahamut is. Rudia answers that it is the dragon that the protagonist summoned in the forest. The elven princess asks if it was the divine dragon that fought against the demon king's army and remembers that Bahamut thanked her. She said that she definitely felt great power. Kyuzuha comes, says hello, and rushes to hug the hero. She is surprised that Alt was able to tame the Mew Mew buffalo and now he can drink milk right after bathing. The main character smiles in response to this. The goddess says that she has been working hard and thanks to the goblins, the hot spring inn is about to be completed. Alt says that Kyuzuha seems to have worked hard, as expected of the person in charge of the springs. Alt introduces Kyuzuha and says that she is in charge of building and running the hot spring inn. He explains that Rudia is in charge of farming, Gain is in charge of defense, Bear is in charge of honey collection, and Snowball is in charge of security. Alt praises Kyuzuka. She says that she likes it when the master strokes her head and wants to be stroked more. Rudia pulls Kyuzuha away from the protagonist and asks how long she plans to stick to the protagonist. The goddess calls the girl selfish for always wanting to be the only one for Alt. Rudia, hugging the protagonist, says that she is not selfish, it is just that Alt is hers as she is his. Kyuzuha reproaches the girl. Gain says that she seems energetic. Tio laughs at the situation. The elf cannot believe that there are so many different races in this village. Beastmen, goblins, humans. Tio notes that this is similar to the utopia that Lucifer, the demon king of light, tried to build. Alt replies that there is something similar to this legend. He recalls that Lucifer invaded heaven to control everything there. In heaven, Lucifer fell in love with the goddess Rudia. The hero thinks that the goddess has the same name as his Rudia. Alt wonders if the goddess Rudia is the Rudia he summoned. The legend says that Rudia is a goddess who fell asleep 2,000 years ago. The hero wonders if what Rudia told him was true. Tio says that in any case, she was in charge of the household. Alt explains that the fox-eared Kyuzuha is not a beastman but a goddess of hot springs. The elf princess is surprised, and the hero says that he has a skill and calls it God of Gache. The protagonist says that he summoned them both and they are goddesses. He says that Rudia is the goddess of fertility. The elf is surprised and says that this man is the goddess Rudia, the supreme god who controls nature, which they, the elves, worship. Tio says that she appreciates the hero's help. The villagers rejoice at Alt's return. The goblin and the bear rejoice at the return of the protagonist and greet him. The villagers show the hero the tomatoes and say that they are excellent. Alt, holding a tomato in his hand, says that thanks to Rudia they are big and offers Tio to try them. He explains that when Rudia puts her hand on the tomatoes, they grow. The elf takes the tomato in her hands, takes a bite and says that the taste is amazing and that there are no such juicy tomatoes even in the land of the elves. Alt says that the tomato paste they make from them will be exquisite. Hein says that their companion on the journey, the medicinal berries, is also thanks to Mrs. Rudia. The guy says that there are springs and delicious food here and if Tio stays here she will not want to return to the land of the elves. The elf is happy with this offer. A crescent moon is visible in the sky. Tio, holding milk in her hands and wearing a kimono, says she took a hot spring bath. She tells Alt that it feels like she's about to melt and that it's a culture shock. The princess, sitting on the sofa, asks if springs can really be so pleasant and says that milk after bathing is also wonderful. Alt, sitting next to her, is glad that she liked it. There is a half-empty bottle of milk on the table. Tio, holding the bottle in her hands, says that now she is surprised by many things, and she cannot believe that she was greeted so warmly as an elf. The elf princess says that her father and mother taught her that humans are greedy creatures unlike elves, but she feels like she misunderstood who humans are. Tio is ashamed of herself. She apologizes and thanks the hero for his help. The protagonist says that although it is difficult to talk about it, she can tell what happened in the forest. Tio once again expresses her gratitude and thanks the goddess Rudia for her guidance. She asks if she was called. Rudia, opening the door, replies that she was not. Alt says that the elf's hearing is too good. The protagonist apologizes, but the elf asks to call her Tio and says that there is no need for formalities. She tells him that she is the princess of a lost country. Alt looks at her questioningly. Tio continues to explain that the Elven Kingdom, which has a history of over 2,000 years in Silesia, was destroyed by an attack by the Dark Elves. The princess says that about 6 months ago, a new dungeon appeared in the forest. She says that it was probably the dungeon where the goddess Rudia sealed one of the 7 great demon lords. The Dark Elf, who was the Demon King's servant, was strengthened by the miasma flowing out of the dungeon, bearing his fangs at them. The hero is surprised that one of the 7 great demon lords has been sealed. Tio reveals that it was the Demon King Belphegor. The protagonist recalls that the Demon King Belphegor is the younger brother of Lucifer, the Demon King of Light. In the book, it is written that Belphegor lost his brother Lucifer to Rudia because he hated her, and he was also at odds with his brother who betrayed the king. The book says that elves are the descendants of the goddess Rudia, and the dark elf is the descendant of Belphegor. Alt wonders if the two races were originally incompatible. Tio says that the demon king Belphegor was defeated by Lucifer and sealed by the goddess Lydia. The hero asks if the dark elves are after Tio because of their connections from 2,000 years ago. The princess replies that it is not only for that. She says that she trusts the hero. Alt, putting his hand to his chest, promises that he will not tell anyone anything. The girl, smiling, tells that the key to removing the seal of the demon king Belphegor is the blood of the royal family of elves. The hero asks about royal blood, and Tio says that in other words, it is her blood. The girl says that the condition for resurrecting the demon king is to spill her blood on Belphegor's sarcophagus. And when the country fell, there was a rule that the royal family must commit suicide, and the girl should never give her blood. She continues to tell that, seeing the elf's grin, the dead people, the destroyed statue of the goddess, the table with 3 daggers lying on it, the girl became scared. When the dagger was at her throat, she was pushed away. It turned out that her parents did not let her die. They wanted Tio to survive and be happy. They let her escape. The princess, crying, says that she wanted this too and said that she was pathetic and could do nothing. Not save, not die, but simply ran away and thus reached these lands. The boy looks at the elf. The girl thinks that's why she was attacked in the forest. The hero thinks that Tio is not pathetic and says that he understands how hard it was for her to go through all this. Alt says that everything is fine now, and while the elf is in the village, neither the elves nor the dark elves will get to her. The girl, shuddering, asks how sure the hero is of this, since her presence in the village could bring them trouble. Tio, clutching the cloth in her hands, says that she is still not sure whether she should obey the royal rules. Alt stands up and shouts what nonsense the elf is talking, and asks that if the dark elves' goal was to defeat the elves, then it would be a good idea for the other side to die. The protagonist yells that this is his territory and is it okay for them to start a war without permission where he is. Alt turns to Tio and says that she has nothing to worry about. The protagonist and his allies are here. The adventurer says that even Rudia herself is here and thinks that if the supreme god of Tio and the elves is Rudia, then this village should be the perfect place for Tio. The elf says that if the elves attack, Alt tells her not to worry as they won't touch her. He says that rather he will try to convince them to join hands and fight together. Tio is happy. The princess rushes at the hero with tears, hugs, and thanks him, asking if Alt is really the messenger of the goddess Rudia. The hero replies that he does not know this, but first asks to let him go. Rudia explodes. Alt exclaims that it's happened again. The girl says that something bad happened and they were attacked by elves. All the houses are on fire. People are trying to put out the fire faster. An elf stands and shouts that the goddess Rudia has given them the responsibility to notice the demon king, that this is a holy war to fulfill the will of the goddess, and he will receive the life of Princess Tio. The hero says that this is the reason why they came to this village. He turns around and looks at the girl. Rudia, pointing at herself, exclaims in surprise that she. An arrow flies past the heroes. Alt tells Rudia that it is dangerous here and she needs to duck. The girl says that this is not possible. She comes up and shouts that she is the goddess of fertility Rudia. She keeps screaming that this is her and Alt's love nest, so they need to stop attacking right now. The elves scream that she is lying and that she is not a goddess, calling her stupid. The enemies, shooting arrows at them, order them to give Tio, who belongs to them, for the blood ritual. Rudia, crouching, does not know what to do. Alt uses sacred flame, which burns all the arrows flying at them. The elf screams that this cannot be. Alt stands at the ready. The elf shouts to the others that they must attack with fireballs instead of arrows and orders them to burn the village of sinful people. The hero asks to wait a minute, introducing himself as Alt Austin, the owner of these places, and wants to talk. The enemy elf shouts that there will be no negotiations, since the hero is the messenger of the demon lord, who forces even goblins to obey. The goblin, when hit by a fireball, screams that they are being crushed. Kyuzuha says he will sort it out and releases a wave of water. The other goblins scream in pain and ask the goddess if she could be gentle, as it is too hot. Kyuzuha, smiling, replies that the hotter the water, the better for their bodies. She calls the water naturally to flow from the spring. The goblins are happy that the water gives them strength. The protagonist orders to catch the elves without killing them. Jane says that this is madness because the elves are masters of archery and magic. Holding the sword, the adventurer continues to say that if they don't do something, they could die. As he walks down the wooden stairs, Alt thinks that Jane is right. The hero wonders if Bahamut can silence the elves, driven by a strong sense of duty. Rudia calls Alt and suggests using the god of gacha, since the hero has accumulated 5 sacred stones as a login bonus. Alt agrees. The circle begins to shine, and the hero, giving sacred stones for entry, asks the god of gacha to open up to get out of the difficult situation. The enemies are surprised. A pillar of light appears. The houses are burning. Alt thinks that a god will appear who can capture the enemy and he should try. The sacred stones are shining. The hero calls upon the god of Gachi to open up. A sound is heard and a pillar of light appears. The protagonist wonders if the summoned one can handle their situation. A rare giant soldier who is the final weapon of the gods, appears and turns on the extermination mode. The soldier says that he will destroy the fools who challenge his master. The robot waits for orders from the master and asks to be allowed to exterminate everyone. He says that he will wipe each of the enemies off the face of the earth. The protagonist asks to wait, and the soldier continues to say that some of the soldier's abilities will be inherited as skills. The characteristic window opens, and a sound is heard that the skill Stun Arrow has been acquired. The hero is surprised by the acquired skill. The protagonist asks the giant soldier to wait and asks to neutralize the enemies without killing them. The soldier replies that anyone who raises their sword against their master will remain a slave for the rest of their life. He switches the mode to neutralize the opponents. The elf shouts at the robot that he will take his head and uses a thunderbolt. The robot, turning its head towards him, activates a barrier against magic. The enemy elf shouts that he has jumped back and orders everyone to be on guard, as this colossus is comparable to an A-rank monster, and the adamantium armor will not allow it to be destroyed. The archers fire their bows. The giant soldier says that if they do not surrender within 10 seconds, he will use force. The elves say that neither magic arrows nor physical ones affect him and ask what to do. The robot starts a countdown. Alt asks to stop and shouts that they can't be killed. The giant says not to worry and explains that the non-lethal mode only causes pain worse than death and they won't die. The machine asks them to feel mortal pain, where they will thrash in agony and not die. The elf screams that they are playing with them and orders them to shoot with increased concentration of magic. The countdown is over. The giant soldier suppresses the enemies with a stunning arrow. The elves scream. Fighting nearby, an enemy elf asks for Princess Tio. A stunning arrow hits him. All the enemy soldiers fall unconscious to the ground. The giant soldier says that there are no casualties. Ludia runs up and says that it is a convenient power as expected from a giant soldier. Alt stands in confusion. Kyuzuha uses the power of the hot springs. Elves are lying on the ground. The hero, putting his head on the elf's chest, says that their lives are not in danger. Jane asks if the hero is going to kill them and says, looking at the robot, that he is frightening. The protagonist says that somehow it all worked out and asks what to do. As he is going down the stairs, Tio runs up to the protagonist and asks if he is okay. Alt tells the princess that it is still dangerous to go outside. The elf replies that she heard a loud crash and became worried. She apologizes and says that it is all because of her. It's raining. The hero says that the village has been damaged. The elf asks if there are any wounded and says that she can use her healing magic. Alt says that they need to check quickly. A girl runs up and tells the hero that something bad has happened and her father has been wounded by an arrow and is not breathing. The villagers gather around the body. The girl calls her father. The heroes come running, but it is useless because the man is already in heaven. The girl looks at her father. The girl, covering her face with her hands, cries. Tio says that it can't be. The man standing next to Alt notices her and shouts that isn't she an elf. The man continues to yell at Tio not to look at their fallen comrade with such pitiful eyes and says that they will not forgive her. The hero asks the villagers to calm down. The man, who has taken up his sword, asks what the hero is doing. The angry villagers ask Mr. Alt to get out of the way. But the main character stands in front of them and says that this elf is not an enemy and asks them to stop. An elf sits on a tree and prepares to shoot Alt. Snowball starts barking. The elf shoots, but the hero manages to dodge. The villagers notice the enemy, and the elf, angry at the dog, pulls out another arrow. Alt uses the giant skill Stun Arrow. The elf, crying out in pain, falls from the tree. The angry villagers ask the hero to say that this is also his ally. The protagonist asks everyone to calm down. The villagers look at him. The hero, pointing at Tio, says that she is on their side and came to help, and if we talk about the wounded, it was already too late. Ludia comes up and says that there is nothing to be done. The girl says that it is her turn. Gain and the girl are surprised. Ludia tells them to stand and watch. Tio thinks, isn't she the supreme goddess of the elves, and this seems too disrespectful. The hero says that they believe in Ludia. The girl nods happily. The villagers ask if this is really Mrs. Ludia. The goddess standing next to the fallen asks the tears of the world tree to bring this man back to life. 9. A light comes from the chest of a man lying on the ground. Alt says the light is warm. Tio and the girl smile happily and the villagers gather around. Waking up, the man asks if he fell asleep. The girl, calling for her father, throws herself into his arms. Ludia sighs and is glad that everything went smoothly. The elf is surprised and says that this is Rudia's power, which the elves have passed down through legends for many years, the Tears of the World Tree. Tio says that Rudia is real and is their supreme elven goddess. Rudia says that she keeps saying this, she is a real goddess that Mr. Alt summoned. The elf, lying on the ground, clasps his hands and says that this is the punishment for pretending to be a goddess. The giant soldier points his hand at the elf and says that he hates those who darken happiness and hit the elf. He raises his hands up and happily says that all targets have been successfully suppressed. Machine says that he is returning home after completing his mission. Alt holds a card with a giant soldier and thinks what a strange god, but thanks to him they are saved. The hero also thanks Rudia silently. The tied-up group of soldiers asks what the heroes are going to do with them. Rudia replies that she will first scald them in a hot spring and then make them swallow milk with unearthly pleasure. The elves begin to pray to the goddess Rudia for salvation. Alt says that if they take this hot spring, the wounds and pains of their bodies will completely heal. The protagonist says that they will be tired after this and asks them to eat enough. The elves look at each other. Alt says that he has no intention of feuding with them, he would like to be able to talk over food. Rudia says that freshly baked bread drizzled with honey is delicious. The tied-up elf's stomach growls. Tio addresses her people and says that she was attacked by a dark elf and was saved by Lord Alt. In front of her people, Princess Tio admitted that she had broken the rules to survive and now doubted whether her words had any weight. She continued to assure the elves that man would follow the gods and become an ally of the elves. In addition to preventing the Demon King from being resurrected, with Mr. Alt's help, the Elven Kingdom could be revived. She continued. Raising her voice, she asked the elves to trust her once more. Looking around the crowd, she saw faces distorted with bitterness. Someone swayed. And not daring to raise his head, he said with determination that they all wanted to recreate the kingdom with their princess. But when they came for her, they saw that she had hired a girl who pretended to be the supreme goddess. Hearing this, Rudia cried out in displeasure. She couldn't understand why no one believed her, because she really was a real goddess. Seeing how tightly Rudia grabbed the face of the unbeliever, Alt tried to stop them. Still not believing, a cry came from the crowd. The speaker reminded her that she wanted to immerse them in boiling water. Tio continued to assure that the girl standing in front of them was the very goddess of fertility. And Rudia, hearing the discontent, angrily explained that she said such a thing because she herself was a witness to a miracle from mythology. Meanwhile, the princess continued to explain. The land they were currently on belonged to Mr. Altu, who had summoned Rudia. The Tears of the World Tree were a secret that belonged only to the two of them. Rudia looked around the crowd of ignoramuses with displeasure. With a malicious smile, she added that these tears could heal any wounds only because she was a goddess. The hot spring had similar powers, which was why she sent the elves there. With a little disappointment, one of them finally admitted that he had seen everything that the goddess had told him, and he vouched for the fact that every word she had said was true. Rudia was pleased that finally, what she had been saying for so long, everyone believed. And lifting a small chair, she placed it in front of herself. Climbing onto it, she addressed the elves, expressing her admiration for them. She was amazed at how devotedly they performed their duty. However, she reminded them that the gods were not idle either. According to the covenant of God Gachai, all the gods have regained their strength through sacrifices and are going to descend to earth again. Hearing this, many eyes with genuine trepidation already looked at the goddess differently. Pay for the gacha and save the world with Alt. We will stand together against the enemies. Elves, Rudia cried out, inspiring everyone present. In the crowd, heated up by the goddess's ardent speech, many joyful cries were heard, praising Lady Rudia. Shaking Mr. Alt's hand, the commander-in-chief of the elves apologized for the attack on his lands, because after the fall of the kingdom, the elves decided that all they had left was their duty, which they must fulfill. And he thanked the princess for helping them avoid a disastrous fate. Turning to the commander-in-chief again, Lady Rudia, reminding him that she was the one who gave the order to prevent the resurrection of the demon king Belphegor, mentioned that besides the royal blood, there was another important thing. Hearing this for the first time, Mr. Alt turned in surprise towards the goddess. And this is none other than Belphegor's servant, she continued without stopping for a second. The commander-in-chief smiled, amazed that the goddess knew about this. However, Alt still did not understand who this servant was. Then Rudia explained to him that the servant was a vessel into which the demon king would be transferred. Belphegor is a demon lord who feeds on laziness and loves those who want to achieve success without putting in any effort. However, even if such a vessel already exists, it will still require royal blood to be resurrected. If this were to happen, their military might would not be enough to prevent it. After such a long explanation, Altu understood the reason why the elves were tracking Tio, and he proposed the following course of action. As the ruler of these lands, he would give them permission to descend into the dungeon where Belphegor lives. As she descends there, the princess will be protected by both her and his subordinates. In this case, Tio would no longer be a victim, and the person who tried to enter the sealed lands would be caught. Feeling incredible joy, the commander-in-chief once again thanked Alt for his help in this difficult matter. The young master's only goal was to create a utopia where all races could live together happily. That's why he could not allow the Demon King to be resurrected. If only he could unite with the Dark Elves, Alt thought with annoyance. What will happen after the Demon King is resurrected? That's right, in that case, all he can do is fight and protect everyone. These difficult thoughts of Alta were dispelled by the commander-in-chief with his next tirade. He apologized again and thanked the goddess, who was already starting to get tired of it. She was ready to forgive them all, as she was currently happy to live with the person she did not get along with in her past life. Hearing this, Alt came closer to Ludia, wanting to know what happened between them in their past life. You still don't remember, the goddess asked with a smile, but in the past it was you who was the Demon King. Not expecting such an answer, the young man's mouth dropped open in surprise, and his eyes widened involuntarily. You led the goblins with such ease, the goddess began to reminisce. Still not believing it, Alt shouted that he had always been a simple man. You were the strongest demon lord, all the monsters loved you and obeyed you without question. So little of this, in the next life he was able to summon goddesses. Ludia continued happily. After carefully considering everything he had heard, the commander-in-chief had to admit that such a thing was simply impossible. Most likely, he was the man the goddess had once loved. Feeling his support, Alt became even more convinced that such a thing was impossible. Ludia couldn't understand why the young master couldn't remember anything about the Demon King last time, nor this time. In any case, you should know that Belphegor is not the best. Be prepared to return your abilities and the memories of our love. Having thus cut off the argument, the goddess laughed and hugged the young man. Here he realized that no matter how hard he tried to get out of Ludia's strong embrace, he was unlikely to succeed. Despite everything that had happened, he was pleased to realize that cooperation with the elves had been pleasant and that he could now rest easy about Tio, as she was surrounded by loyal elves. However, what would they do in this situation? Alt decided that it would be best to start by increasing the number of peoples who could live on his lands, gradually increasing his wealth. Then let's start with the legendary sweets of the elves, suggested the princess. She had once presented them to the supreme goddess, and she had liked them very much. So hearing about them again, she jumped with happiness, anticipating how she would taste them again. Tio was sure that she would bring profit to their village, which could then be invested in gacha. Alt did not fully understand what the princess meant, decided to ask again, but the girls decided that he would see everything later. At the same time, in the main residence of the county, into the office of Count Dorian, the maid carefully entered. Seeing the deplorable state of the count, she could not bring herself to speak to him and stood in front of his desk in anticipation. Having come to his senses a little, he finally spoke, drawing out his words and frantically moving piles of papers from one part of the table to another. Having greeted Ririna, the count recalled that she had been close to Alt, to which she readily agreed, refusing to acknowledge Namakla as her master. As she said this, she tried to look confident, not taking her eyes off her master. At the same time, the count hunched over and bowed his head even lower, and quietly ordered Ririna to immediately go to the border where Alt was now. Standing up a little, he handed the surprised girl a sealed envelope. Empty, doomed eyes looked up at the maid, but they seemed to look through her. The count could not stop himself and kept reproaching himself for making Namakla, whose ability had proven useless, the royal tamer. Not only was he unable to tame the dragon, he also wounded her royal highness. The once confident in every step, now completely broken man continued to grieve. Because Namakla could not control his powers, unscrupulous people began to steal from them. The magical beasts within the palace walls are filled with discontent and can get out of control at any moment. The count clasped his head with both hands and screamed in despair. He was pierced by the realization that at this rate, not only would he not live to old age, but that their family would most likely be disposed of. Tears began to flow from the man's eyes as he broke into a desperate howl. He hated himself for driving Alt away. Now he seemed like the only candidate suitable for the role of the next head of the family. If that could be possible, the girl quietly interjected, it would be better if all his merits were recognized earlier. Having calmed down a bit, the count concluded in an even tone that for now the monsters were still being taken care of in his name. But it would be best to hand over the position of head of the family to Altu. I believe that is what you wrote in the letter, Ririna confirmed her guess. The girl agreed with this decision. She would be very happy if her master inherited the title of count. That is why the current head of the family asked her to do everything possible so that Alt would agree to take over the title. You are worried that he might refuse. Ririna's surprise knew no bounds. After all, Mr. Alt really loved the monsters of the royal palace. However, the Count's fears were not unfounded. Alt had recently contacted him by sending a carrier pigeon to the residence. Hearing this, the maid was even more surprised. In turn, the Count was also amazed. After all, in the letter his son described the rescue of the elven princess and the conclusion of an alliance with this people. Moreover, as proof of friendship, he had a certain magical object in his hands. If he really did something like that, it would be a historic feat. Because the magic of elves is much stronger than the magic of humans, and their country was in great need of various magical technologies. However, before this, it was widely known that the elves hated humans. They protected themselves from the outside world with a barrier that once closed off part of the forest and prevented anyone from stealing their technology. Realizing how incredible Mr. Alt had done, the maid couldn't help but smile, becoming even more convinced of how wonderful her master was. At the same time, the Count sadly propped his head on his hand and clenched his teeth. He was sure that his son was angry with him, and yet he continued to think about the benefits of an alliance with the elves, which would provide them with access to their technology. But what if they monopolize it? And will it be possible to profit from it? Worried by her master's vague muttering, Ririna was about to interrupt him. But then there was a furious pounding on the door. Namakel burst into the office, throwing open the door and calling his father, worried about something. How can this be understood? Can a brother become the head of the family? The young man shouted in his father's face with undisguised anger, slamming his hand on the table. Just recently, Namakel was negotiating to hire a skilled assassin as his bodyguard. He was confident that with such a man's protection, he would be able to tame the dragon. However, his father interrupted his impassioned speech. Looking at his son, Dorian admitted his mistake. The ability Dragon Tamer is not a skill of their unconditional submission. Whether you can tame a dragon or not depends on your basic Dragon Tamer skills. The Count said listlessly, leaning back in his chair. Once, due to his lack of this skill, he was unable to tame a behemoth. Angry and disappointed, Namakel realized that with a level 1 Dragon Tamer skill, there was a high probability that he would not be able to tame the dragon. Rather, something like this is simply impossible, Dorian added after thinking for a moment. This sharp remark from his father drove the young man into a stupor. If this continues, our family will perish. As if not noticing his son's confusion, the Count continued. With his hand propped up, the father, looking bored, asked Namakel to bow at Alt's feet and try to revive the family. Hearing this, the young man clenched his teeth in rage. Despite his low skill level, he still thought he was better than his brother. Alt's skill, God of Gacha, was completely useless in his opinion. Didn't he deserve to be the head of the family? Following his words, he once again hit the table and knocked over several sheets of paper. Noticing this, Ririna was about to lower herself to pick them up when she saw a picture of a beautiful woman on one of them. Seeing the puzzlement on her face, Namakel also looked at the fallen leaf and both froze over it. Afterwards, they both looked at the no longer young Count and froze, waiting for an explanation. However, he hesitated, slightly embarrassed by the fact that he had been exposed earlier than he had planned. The long silence was broken by the young man, who finally understood why his father was so insistent on Alt's return. He simply wanted to retire early and be in the company of nice ladies again. Without denying the obvious, the Count decided to tell everything as it was. The care of monsters imposed on him since childhood was of no interest to him. But despite this, he, as the head of the Austin family, had fulfilled his duty for many years. And so he saw nothing wrong with retiring early and doing what he liked until old age. However, the son could not understand his father's intentions and decided that he was most likely just deceiving him. Because of this, a heated argument began between them. Looking at them from the side, Ririna sighed heavily and mentally wished to be next to Mr. Alt as soon as possible. At the same time, two travelers were making their way through the two-sided Silesian sea of trees, one of whom noticed the entrance to this place. A fragile-looking girl supported the wounded young man, helping him overcome step by step. She encouraged him, assuring him that it was only a short distance to the village of Alta. Not noticing a massive root in the grass, the young man stumbled. The girl was unable to hold him, causing both to fall to the ground. The wounded man was the first to become concerned, asking if Rin was okay. Tears ran from the girl's eyes. She could not come to terms with her brother's wounds, believing that he was disfigured. But the worst thing was that it was done by one person, Namakel Austin, whom Rin now hated and despised. If we were adventurers, the nobles would hardly have treated us so cruelly, the young man said as calmly as possible, wanting to calm Rin down. But instead, he made her even more angry. There was no way she could agree with something like that. and she was about to answer her brother, but then something caught his attention. Several dragons circled above them. Noticing the prey, they happily grinned, anticipating a fun hunt. Rin decided to attack them first and used the skill Blizzard. Many shards of ice flew at the monsters. However, after the glow from the spell dissipated, a terrible picture appeared before the travelers. The dragons repelled Rin's attack. Despite everything that was happening, it was still unclear how these dragons ended up here. Wanting to save his sister, the young man decided that it would be better if Rin abandoned him. That way, she would have a chance to escape. But for what purpose, then, did they come here together? The girl thought, completely desperate. Suddenly, another dragon appeared in the sky, significantly larger than the three that had attacked the travelers. Its scales resembled armor and its voice cut through the air. Violence was forbidden in its master's garden. Still not understanding what was happening, the girl realized that in front of them was none other than the sacred dragon Bahamut. Immediately, a rider on a white wolf appeared from the forest. Approaching the girl, he asked if she was injured. Rin, not believing her eyes, asked him a counter-question if he was Lord Namakel. Alto was surprised that the girl was familiar with his brother. But despite this, the young gentleman introduced himself as the Lord's older brother. "My lord," asked Alto Bahamut, "may I slay the man-eating dragons with my breath?" But Alto refused this request. He thought that even such dragons could be tamed. Deciding that Bahamut was distracted, the man-eating dragons surrounded him, hoping that if they all attacked at once, Bahamut would fall. However, things turned out a little differently. Bahamut, not doubting his strength at all, grabbed several of them and threw them far into the forest. You would think that after falling from such a height they would have lost consciousness or weakened. But even after landing on their backs, the two were still able to move. They immediately rushed upward again and were almost immediately grabbed by the Bahamut, who threw them into the ground again. Holding one of the enemies with his lower paw, Bahamut noticed that one of the flock was flying away. Naturally, this did not help him. Flying after him, Bahamut not only caught up with him, but also overtook the unfortunate one, blocking his path. The next moment, the would-be fugitive was knocked out. Looking down at his fallen enemies, Bahamut was sure that they would now be unable to harm anyone. With her mouth slightly open and not fully believing what had happened, the girl admitted that the battle was incredible. Yawning, Bahamut lay down next to his master, who was looking for something in his bag, and Rin hurried to help her brother. Wanting to make sure everything was okay with the travelers, Alt approached them. However, the girl, casting an unkind glance in his direction, clenched her teeth. Her brother was wounded by Lord Namakel, and upon learning that the young man who saved them was his older brother, some of the hatred spread to him as well. Weakened even more, the young man tried to stop the girl, but she no longer heard him. Not long ago, they accompanied the Lord to the dungeon of Purgatory during his mission to tame the dragon. However, he failed, and he took out all his anger and frustration on his companions. In addition to his cruel treatment of people throughout the journey, at the end of the mission, he forced her brother to carry him on his back. Then the monster attacked them. The longer Alt listened to the girl, the wider his eyes widened. Being quite tired, they decided to run in different directions instead of fighting the monster. But after that, the Lord blamed them for the failure of the mission. But she just wanted to go on a little adventure with her brother. Rin continued her story tearfully. Having regained his strength, the wounded man asked his sister to stop again as loudly as possible. Surprised, she turned to him, not understanding what she had done wrong. Failure is possible in any mission, and he alone is responsible for his wounds, so don't blame that person so much for them. The young man, barely able to stand up, raised one knee and bowed before their savior, apologizing for his sister's rudeness. "We headed here as soon as we heard about the hot spring that heals all wounds and illnesses. Sir, could you help us by showing us the way to it?" Still not daring to raise his head, the adventurer continued. Here Bahamut, propping his head up with his paw, grinned, finally remembering where he had seen the guy before. He was the same adventurer who had defended the stupid, in his opinion, Lord. The dragon admitted that he had not known about it until they entered his cave. However, they were lucky in that the adventurer entered the cave first. The dragon raised itself a little and made the young man happy, because today he met his master. The adventurer looked questioningly at the Bahamut, not fully understanding what he was talking about. Their conversation was interrupted by Alt, who fell to his knees before the travelers. He sincerely apologized for what his brother had done and honestly admitted that he knew absolutely nothing about it. As atonement for his guilt, he offered to heal their wounds. While the dragon watched the lizard with interest and tried to touch it with its claw, the young tamer unwound the adventurer's bandages and examined his wound. Most likely, only the deadly poison of the jellyfish could leave such a mark. "You can't do without an elixir here, but don't worry, I have a stronger and better remedy," Alt assured the travelers. Concentrating on the summoning, the young tamer closed his eyes. and part of the space was illuminated by the light emanating from the tear of the world tree. Not believing his eyes, the adventurer watched as his hands were healed. After a couple of seconds, it was no longer possible to notice the former traces of injury on them. Could they really be healed? The adventurer still looked at his hands with doubt. None of the travelers could understand how such a thing was possible. Ernst could not believe that a nobleman would spend a rare potion on him, a commoner. However, his assumptions were immediately dispelled by Alt, because it was not about the elixir but his special skill that allowed him to heal. To be more precise, it is a power borrowed from a goddess. Unlike her, his skill can only be used once every 3 days. Having said this, Alt wanted to calm down the adventurer who was already starting to worry about the rarity of the potion. Getting up from the ground, Ernst apologized for the inconvenience and introduced himself to his benefactor, wondering how he could thank his savior. Wiping away her tears, Rin introduced herself, continuing to thank Alt for healing her brother. Trying to console his sister, the adventurer put his arm around her shoulders and tried to calm her down by reminding her that they were now in front of the Lord. Looking at such a sweet scene, the young master couldn't help but smile and apologized for his brother once again. Ernst also smiled and expressed his highest gratitude to both Lord Alt and Bahamut for their help during the attack of the small dragons. The dragon proudly turned away and pretended not to care. And Alt suddenly quickly asked if his new acquaintances were S-rank adventurers, the Wolves of Dawn. At present, this title is rather decorative, which is why even after the wounds heal, the path to the royal capital is closed to them. However, this rather pleased both Bahamut and his master. Now they needed adventurers, especially those who could use magic. When Alt returned to his village, the astonished travelers could not take their eyes off the strange spectacle. While Alta was away, the goddess and Princess Tio had thoroughly prepared for the upcoming cooking, gathering a lot of ingredients in the kitchen. Noticing the new guest, they quickly changed her clothes and gave her an apron, which greatly embarrassed Rin. Without thinking twice, Alt also put on an apron and going to the kitchen table, placed a bowl in front of him. Seeing Rin's confusion, the others began to explain to her what they were going to cook, the best sweets of antiquity, the recipes of which the elves carefully preserved. This dessert was both sweet and cold at the same time. Of course, it was ice cream. However, despite this small presentation of the dessert, Rin still couldn't understand what everyone was so happy about. Seeing how easily Rin could mix the ingredients in a bowl, the princess was pleasantly surprised at how quickly the adventurer had mastered everything. Besides, Tio was happy that the girl could use ice magic, and Rin had never even thought about using her power to make sweets until now. Everything about this place amazed her. She had never seen so many different races before: goblins, elves, dragons, and humans developing a city together. The most incredible thing was that all this was built by one person. Now in the girl's eyes, Mr. Alt was. After watching her cook from the side, a young man quietly approached the girl. Rin, who had not noticed him before, was very scared when he was a step away from her. Alt assumed that the girl was engrossed in cooking because she liked it and announced that from today on she would be responsible for ice cream. Ludia was in joyful anticipation and clapped her hands and jumped up and down from time to time. Looking at her, Alt wondered if this delicacy was really that tasty. Taking on a serious look, the goddess began that such luxury became available to the elves only because they were a magical civilization. Ice confectionery was created by combining the best techniques. 2,000 years ago, she ate ice cream every day with her hands on her hips, as if she owned it. The goddess bragged to the young man. However, he did not share her delight, believing that eating such food every day was more harmful than useful. But Ludia did not attach much importance to Alt's doubts and continued to dreamily reason. This time, buffalo mumu milk and bear honey will be used to prepare the dessert, which means that the dessert will exceed all her expectations. And finally, the cherished words were heard. It's ready. And before the goddess once again appeared her favorite dessert, ice cream made from medicinal berries. Both then and now the delicacy looked extremely appetizing, so much so that even Alta wanted to try it. According to the princess, there was no need to worry about the amount of ice cream eaten, because it contained healthy fruit juice. While Ludia, not believing her luck, decided to take a spoon, Alt had already managed to try the dessert, and it really exceeded all his expectations. A moment later, she jumped with happiness. It really was that ice cream. With a soft, delicate texture, a honey aroma that melted in the mouth, and a slight sourness from the berries which only improved its taste. After finishing the first portion of the wonderful dessert, tears involuntarily flowed from Ludia's eyes. The princess was glad that she was able to please the goddess by presenting her with her favorite dessert and offered her another portion. Alt smiled and was sure that they could sell this ice cream as a delicacy of their village. Seeing everyone's delight, Rin decided to try the ice cream as well. She liked it too. Noticing Alt's relaxed smile, Ludia turned to him. However, for some reason, he began to deny it. Naturally, no one believed him. If he didn't like it, he would hardly have smiled like that. Then he was called out. The Inyu traders arrived with the ordered provisions. While the people were unloading the convoy, a beastman merchant greeted Alt. In appearance, he resembled a cute puppy, although he had not been one for a long time. The young master couldn't help but apologize to the Inyu. After all, it was because of his request that they had to bring so many things from overseas. However, this race was not at all embarrassed by this. For them, it was something like a blessing. One curious dragon, having smelled the delicious smell of the Inyu, decided to see who it was coming from. With his sudden appearance, he greatly frightened the workers, who could not believe that Mr. Alt had managed to tame them. He, in turn, believed that his merits were exaggerated and was sure that he managed to tame these dragons only because they were low-ranking. This is what surprised those around him the most. But Alt was more interested in whether there were any problems with the products along the way. Having received a negative answer, he was delighted and changed the subject. He wondered if the beastman remembered the bear that the young man had told him about earlier. Of course, the Inyu supported the conversation with genuine interest. How could he forget about this story? He was very interested in whether Mr. Alt had made progress in the matter of taming the bear. Deciding not to reveal all his cards at once, Alt conspirators smiled and, covering his mouth with his hand, offered the merchants a taste of their new signature dish. The Inyu were happy whenever they came to this village. They always left it happy and glad that the owner of these lands was so kind to them. Having asked Tio to bring a treat to the guests, Alt decided to watch their reaction from the side. At the same time, the princess, having offered dessert, introduced herself and invited the Inyu representatives to the table. Seeing the delicacy, one of them sniffed incredulously, trying to understand what they were being offered to taste. Another of them jumped up in his chair, realizing that in front of them was a real elf princess. Smiling, Alt told the guests about the cool dessert and urged them to try it before it melted. Sniffing, the Inyu caught a pleasant sweet smell and decided to try the treat. Delight, what is this? They couldn't figure out why this dessert was so delicious. One of them suggested that the secret ingredient was honey. Yes, they had never tried anything like this before. This ice candy is called ice cream, and its recipe has been known to the elves since ancient times. In its production, the princess used her magic absolute freezing, which allows you to create ice that never melts. This time we managed to recreate this sweetness only thanks to the help of everyone else. We wanted to make it a feature of our village, Alt continued happily. Meanwhile, the amazed guests suddenly fell silent. And then a loud, joyful howl was heard. The Inyu rejoiced. They were sure that if they started selling this delicacy, it would definitely bring in a lot of money. Not only is this dessert so good on its own that it will easily become the most popular, but its production also uses ancient elven magic, which is desired to be seen in many countries. Is it really the princess herself who does this? Not quite. Wanting to reduce the ardor of his interlocutors, Alt began. The sorceress Rin also does this. The happy Inyu stood in a circle and raised their ice cream cups up and connected them, giving the dessert a new name. Ice cream from the elven princess. The princess's loyal servant, hearing such rudeness towards both her and Rin, hurried to interrupt the merchant's jubilation. However, he failed to do so. They were absorbed in ideas about how this dish would make all their dreams come true, bringing them incredible profits. Now Alt himself tried to stop them, saying that they were planning mass production of the dessert, because after all, it was handmade. You don't have to worry about that. We'll start with demonstrating the princess's dessert, and then we'll worry about hiring staff and setting up a ranch for the buffalo Mumu. Winking, one of the Inyu continued to dispel Alta's doubts. Ice cream in such packaging is unique, so why not make your own brand out of it? A merchant who hasn't noticed something like this is not a merchant at all. They continued to exhort Alta and Inyu. Mr. Alt, we would like to obtain exclusive rights to sell this product, his old acquaintance said confidently. As a deposit, we offer you 1 million gold, and as payment for the contract, we pay you 300,000 gold every month. Such a generous offer incredibly surprised Alt, who did not expect such an outcome. He was worried about such a large sum. But the Inyu could not understand his worries, since the village had grown considerably since their last visit, and the houses were much more beautiful than they had been. A place where so many different races live together, and where travelers and adventurers are drawn to the healing hot springs, will now become even more popular thanks to its signature ice cream. We see how Silesia is becoming a rich territory, and rest assured that our instincts are not failing us. Alta and Inyu continued to assure. The young master of these lands was about to answer him when a frantic cry was heard. It was Ludia. She was grateful to the merchants for appreciating all their efforts so highly. After all, starting a village from scratch in the wilderness was extremely difficult. Alt was about to console her. But then he saw that the goddess, almost without crying, was shaking in Yuanyu's hand and was already ready to spin the gacha again. Having signed the contract, they said goodbye, and before they had even driven a couple of meters away, Yuanyu already wanted to meet again. As soon as they left, Ludia kept asking Alt to spin the gacha again, happy that he now had money for it again. Concerned by such a sharp change in his girlfriend's mood, the young man tried to refuse. But the already inflamed goddess tried in every way to interest him so that he would do it as soon as possible. And she began to tell him that a special action was currently taking place that increased the level of appearance. She really wanted to do it again. How wonderful it is to relax in a sauna after a hard day at work, surrounded by natural beauty. Having rested, Alt left the font and approached an inconspicuous cabinet in which stood a small army of bottles of milk. Opening one of them, he refreshed himself. Nowadays, thanks to ice cream, his domain was at the peak of its popularity. Every day, adventurers from all over the world arrived in the village. Because ice cream was becoming more and more popular every day, Tio and Rin had to open a small cafe. The talk about handmade ice cream from the elf princess was endless. Many claimed that they had never tasted anything more delicious, and shared with each other that they had come here only to try it. Alt, Jane, and the goblin, who had rightly noted that word of mouth is the best advertising, watched the crowd at the ice cream parlor from the sidelines. The young man could not help but be pleased with the success of his campaign, which brought them not only profit, but also new residents and adventurers. Noticing his master, a strange-looking man ran up to the alto and reported to him that he had fed the wyvern. However, he added sadly, the amount of supplies for her was running out very quickly. He was not sure whether what was left would be enough at least until the end of the month. The swordsman was quite surprised by this. He remembered that they had bought too much food for the wyvern, and now it suddenly turned out that it was not enough. But Alt decided that this was due to these monsters' love of eating and thought about buying food for them. Also, the buffalo Mumu, the man continued his report, paid almost no attention to him. And this moment did not surprise his master at all. He allowed the buffalo to graze freely, thanks to which he no longer experienced stress. After reporting on a job well done, Alt allowed the man to visit the hot spring, and he, having expressed his gratitude to the master, immediately rushed away. Looking after him, Jane decided to confirm his guesses regarding the identity of the worker. Was he really the previous owner of the shuru? The young man nodded in agreement. This man realized all his mistakes and began to work well again. After discussing the plan to capture the dungeon with Ernst, they agreed that before that, the adventurer should also explore the forest surrounding it. This will allow them to reduce the chance that someone will be able to approach Belfeger's dungeon without their knowledge. After Ernst was appointed Minister of Intelligence of Silesia, he promised to live up to all of Alt's expectations. Of course, Ernst was already a strong swordsman, but who knows, maybe after visiting the hot springs he will be able to conquer the dungeon alone. Weren't you planning on playing gacha today? Hein said listlessly, scratching his head as the three of them walked towards the hot springs. Upon entering, Alt's head split into pieces and blood spurted from his ears, all due to the terribly loud screams. Sitting on the floor in surprise, the young man witnessed a quarrel between two goddesses. Kyuzuho was sure that her sister simply did not fully understand how important it was to attract customers. Rudia disagreed, claiming that the most important thing for them now was to spin gacha. The goddess of fertility claimed that further development of the village would only be possible after the promotion of the gacha and the invocation of new gods. In turn, Kyuzuha believed that if the conditions for guests to stay at the hot springs were improved by adding a massage room, a personal chef, a Japanese-style garden, and other things, guests would be drawn to them, which would also contribute to the development of the village. Trying to stop them, the young man came closer and realized with horror that if he did, they would tear up the check for 100 million gold from the Inyu tribe. However, despite all his persuasion and requests, none of the goddesses listened to him. They only grabbed the check tighter, trying to take it away from their rival. When the check was almost torn, Alt could no longer remain calm and no longer asked the girls to stop, but shouted. But despite all his efforts, at that very moment the girls flew away from each other. Each of them had only half a check left in their hands. Having flown into the wall, the young man hit his head painfully, rubbing the place of the bruise. He heard another scream. Deciding that things couldn't get any worse, the Alt picked up both halves of the check, not knowing how to fix it. The goddesses had only quarreled over the potential increase in people visiting the hot springs, he thought with annoyance. That is, if the number of people per day will be 300 people, then the hot springs will become a status object. Kyuzuho was pleased with how quickly her master realized everything. Now in their village, taking into account the elves living there were about 200 different creatures. To implement Kyuzuka's idea, about 100 more would be needed, Alt thought out loud. The goddess, who had prepared in advance for a favorable outcome for her, immediately had a leaflet advertising their hot springs in her hands. Proud of herself for the work she had done, the girl pricked up her ears, expecting praise. After carefully reading the text on the leaflet, Alt agreed that no girl could pass by such an advertisement. Its slogan read, "If you enter here, you will become as beautiful as a goddess." Kyuzuha added to her brilliant idea that demand would also increase if Rudia were to distribute the leaflets. Looking at her, no one would be able to doubt the truthfulness of their proposal. However, despite the temptation of the offer, Alt was still overcome with doubts, which Rudia also understood. How could one invite clients into the forest? The main problem was that the forest was close to the dungeon, which is why it often got into trouble. So recently, wyverns appeared. Alt could not but agree with such arguments of the goddess of fertility. After all, even the wolves of the dawn had been given a lot of trouble by them. But then it dawned on the young man. A way to solve all the problems at once and attract many women, Alt happily proclaimed. What if clients were brought to them by wyverns? These dragons will allow people to fly over the dangerous forest with ease, and the hot springs hotel will be further fortified. At the same time, the wyverns will be able to earn their own food. Unexpectedly for herself, Rudia suddenly came to the conclusion that if this event pays for itself, then it will be possible to spin more gacha. Inspired by Kyuzuha's idea, Alt himself began enthusiastically adding to her idea, achieving that their new service would be flying wyvern transportation. Both goddesses were pleased with this decision. It will allow them to target any client. After you add the new information to the flyer, distribute the leaflets in all the nearby towns and villages, Alt turned to Kyuzuha with a smile. She, in turn, did not stop admiring him. Rudia interrupted the moment of joy, reminding him of the god of gacha. Have you already forgotten what you did with the check? Alt seemed to ask the goddesses irritably, and they were dumbfounded. The young man sighed and reassured them, reminding them that the check had to be cashed first, and after checking its authenticity at the bank, he would most likely succeed. The check was still legible, so Alt hoped that the bank would accept it. The goddesses, who had managed to get scared, joyfully joined hands in a sign of reconciliation. Well then, let's start with lunch. Having said this, Alt called the wyverns, and now they were flying towards them over the first line of the forest. Such a sharp rise in height made Rudia press herself into the saddle and hold on to Alt more tightly. For her, everything was happening very quickly, so soon she was already tearfully begging Alt to fly more slowly. To which Kyuzuha, who had been enjoying the flight all this time, advised Rudia to stay in the village if she was so afraid of heights. It is worth remembering here that they were all flying together on one dragon, but they were accompanied by two more who were enjoying the free flight. Rudia tried to justify herself to Kyuzuha, explaining that she wanted to be around Alt as much as possible. But she just laughed at her, saying that a goddess afraid of heights looked pathetic. Surely there will be clients as timid as Rudia, the young man added, comforting the goddess, and this issue also needs to be resolved. Kyuzuha thinking suggested creating a hut similar to a horse-drawn carriage, and Alt liked this idea. Leaving the forest behind, they approached the city. Seeing its walls, the young man ordered the dragon to land near the nearest gate. Before landing, the wyvern stopped in the sky, not daring to descend to the ground. Then the travelers noticed that the gates were already raised, and some strange pandemonium was taking place below. Armed from head to toe, the people awaited their descent. They decided to fight to the death, just to prevent their enemies from entering the city to protect their children and wives. Their opponents turned out to be proud and formidable thunder lions, deafening everyone with their menacing roar as they approached the city closer and closer. Alt was very surprised when he saw the thunder lions. Barely holding back her nausea, Rudia offered to help all the townspeople, and Kyuzuha looked on in fear as the lions began to attack. Without thinking twice, Alt ordered the wyverns to strike the lions from above with their fiery breath. His order was carried out by them immediately, and at that very moment the sky was lit up by a multitude of volleys. Not knowing now who to fear more, the knights indignantly decided to attack the air targets, calling for help from archers, not realizing that the dragons had come to their aid. Hearing this, Alt shouted as loudly as possible that he was the master of Silesia, and that the dragons were just his tamed familiars that should not be feared. As proof of his words, one of the wyverns rushed to the ground and entered into a fight with the thunder lion, protecting one of the knights. Despite everything that had happened, Rudia still felt sick, which she immediately shared with the young man. Wyvern quickly realized that the thunder lion was much weaker than the Bahamut, and wanting to get rid of the enemy as soon as possible, the Dran was about to swing at him, when suddenly the lion stopped him with a sudden question. He could not understand why a man was controlling him. "Because my master is strong," the dragon said, stopping. Noticing how stupidly the wyvern had fallen for his trick, he grinned contentedly. At that very moment, the lion wriggled out from under the dragon and struck him with 1,000 lightning bolts, knocking the unfortunate man unconscious. The Thunder Lions thought that the wyvern was now completely weakened and decided to attack it as a pack, taking it by numbers. Kyuzuha immediately rushed to help her fallen comrade, calling on the healing steam. For a few moments it covered everything around. Then while the lions were wondering where all the smoke was coming from, the cured dragon rushed into battle again. Having united all, the dragons began to mercilessly pour fire on their opponents. And the knights who watched this almost believed that they were already in hell. Alt landed not far from them and, standing on the ground, continued to support the shaking Ludia. Despite the many burns, the lions did not give up, deciding to attack with the whole pack. Standing in a circle, they began to accumulate energy for a discharge of incredible power. Seeing this, the knights prepared to retreat, realizing that things were taking a bad turn. Seeing that the discharge would inevitably hit them soon, Kyuzuha turned to her master in fear. But he, not paying any attention to her, put one hand forward and called upon the sacred flame. The discharge pierced the sky and dissolved into the young hands. The Thunder Lions could not believe that such an attack could be absorbed by a human. In a blind rage, the leader of the Thunder Lions rushed at the man. He thought that the proximity of the Demon King's dungeon had strengthened him, but Alt was already preparing to attack the monster again. But before he could get close to him, he fell, losing consciousness. Shocked by the sudden fall of the leader, the pack retreated, not daring to begin the attack again. Still not recovering from the shock, Alt approached the leader, watching as his pack retreated. It seemed to him that he had seen something like this somewhere before. Sitting in a circle, the monsters bowed their heads, apologizing to each other for not being able to control their powers. "You will be able to use your power properly if you agree to go to our village," the young lion tamer offered with a smile to the young lion. Well, submission to the strong is also a form of pride, the new leader of the pack decided after thinking about it. The other lions loudly supported him. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of the young man. His tamer level had again increased to 12, which now allowed him to increase the strength of his familiars almost twice. Having miraculously escaped death, each soldier tried to get as close as possible to his savior to thank him. One of them had heard a lot about the Lord of Silesia, but he could not even imagine that Mr. Alt would not only subdue the Thunder Lion but also heal him. Until now, one thing remained unclear: what brought him to their city. However, the reason was quite simple. They wanted to advertise all the famous places of their village. After reading the leaflet handed to them by Alt, the knights were pleasantly surprised by the abundance of such tempting offers. Noticing the interest, the young city guard casually mentioned that hot springs help heal wounds and promote rapid recovery. Such abundant attention could not but please Kyuzuka. She appeared before her future guests as the goddess of hot springs. But one circumstance confused the knights, namely, that the one who introduced herself as a goddess looked like a beastman. Not noticing the doubts of those around her, the joyful Kyuzuha continued to talk about how they were planning to hold several one-day tour. At the end of her speech, she invited the entire knightly detachment to their village. Everyone who listened to Kyuzuka found her incredibly sweet and agreed to cooperate with their saviors. So a lot of advertisements appeared in the city, telling everyone about the hot springs, which quickly gained popularity and began to attract even more guests to their village. Regardless of occupation, gender, or distance, the good news of the healing hot spring and cool dessert spread far and wide. A few days later, the village of Alta became a real pandemonium. Began to arrive from all over, wanting to visit all the interesting sights of this place, from the city shops to a trip to the hot springs. Meanwhile, Ludia was quietly laughing. Noticing this, Alt became curious about why she was in such a good mood today. The reason for this was simple and lay in the success of their source. Everything about this idea seemed perfect to her, from the wyverns delivering customers through the air to the thunder lions guarding the horse-drawn carriages. But the goddess was most pleased, of course, with the profit. Ludia was glad that despite the torn check the young man had managed to cash it. She continued, sorting through the gold coins. In the eyes of Hein and Alt, such a spectacle looked very disgusting, which, however, they did not hide. Looking at them slyly, the goddess shared that she had long felt the imminent appearance of the god SSR, and asked to leave the final stage to her. Not fully understanding what she was talking about, Alt decided to use his god gacha skill again. Despite the large expenses, the young man believed that they would not only pay off in the future, but had already paid off now due to successful ice cream sales and the growing popularity of hot springs. SSR gods useful in battle will be doubled this week. This time, the goddess's premonition did not fail her, and she, rejoicing at such luck, decided to pray for their future success. From the outside, her plea seemed strange and unnatural, so the swordsman and goblin, frozen in amazement, involuntarily grimaced, not believing that a 6% chance could justify itself. Alt alone believed in Rudia's assurances, and with full confidence in success, he invested all 100 million gold into the summoning. Suddenly there was a deafening roar, and the place for the summoning was illuminated by a bright light. Not understanding where it came from, Gain and the goblin tried to cover their eyes. Suddenly, a shock wave threw Alt not far away, and cracks began to crawl across the floor. Thus Verena, the goddess of blacksmithing, appearing before everyone with an incredibly huge and terrifying hammer. Despite her imminent appearance, she was already ready to create for her master the highest weapon capable of killing even the gods. For this, she needed sacred iron and orichalcum, which Verena immediately reported, wanting to start blacksmithing as soon as possible. The newly minted goddess was amazed when she learned that her master did not possess any of the above. Alt in turn was no less surprised than she was. Earlier he thought that sacred iron existed only in legends. "That's it," Verena screamed in frustration and, overcome with emotion, struck the ground with her hammer again. After which Alt asked her not to do something like that again. Wanting to support her friend, Rudia began to praise her best creation, the flaming hammer, the rarest treasure in which all the power of fire was contained. Raising her head, the goddess recognized the speaker as one of her sisters, and for some reason tears appeared in her eyes. A fleeting thought immediately gave her new hope. Maybe they had mithril, but to everyone's regret they all burned. Angrily, Gain was ready to offer her his sword. Even weapons made from monsters remained simple steel, he indignantly reproached her. But he failed to reason with the goddess. Annoyed by such an unfavorable state of affairs for her, she was ready to accept anything, if only to quickly take up blacksmithing again. Unlike her sister, Rudia did not give up and decided to find out if it was possible to buy mithril. But this material was extremely rare, which is why its cost was 200,000 gold, and in their situation they could not spend such a huge amount. Desperate, she fell to her knees again. Her goal was to create a powerful weapon. But how to create it without the necessary materials? Now she can't be of any use. Seeing the genuine sadness of the goddess, even Hein began to sympathize with her. Lost in thought, Alt's eyes accidentally fell on a sword standing alone by the wall. Taking it in her hands, the goddess calmed down a little. Meanwhile, the young man continued. He took this sword from his father's house, but he had never had to use it before. So he asked her to melt it down. Looking at the sword, she smiled tenderly as if to an old friend. However, she immediately assumed a serious look. She would improve it so much that she could kill an ancient dragon with one blow. Alt was surprised. All that remained was to find a suitable building for the forge, where the goblin kindly agreed to take the goddess. Yes, it will really be difficult to deal with her, Jane concluded with a grin, casually throwing his sword over his right shoulder. The young man thought about consulting with the Inyu before buying rare metals. He was confident that if he trusted Verena and provided her with all the materials she needed, she could do anything. A few days later, Alt was approached again with a request. They found him in a small courtyard reserved for wyverns. Not expecting to see anyone at such an early hour, the young man was feeding the dragons. Turning towards the voice, he looked in surprise at the gloomy elves, the princess, and her two escorts. Putting on a very serious face, Tio asked if they could build a sauna in their village. Perplexed, Alt decided to ask again, do they want to build a sauna? It turns out that after the destruction of their kingdom, they never visited it. For them it was tantamount to death. The princess could no longer stand and collapsed on the ground, almost begging for a sauna. Her subordinates immediately ran to her. Without paying any attention to anything, one of the dragons lifted Rudia, and no matter how hard she tried to break free, she couldn't. Still not understanding what was happening, the young man turned and looked questioningly at the goddess of fertility. The sauna is a steam bath where people go to cleanse their souls and bodies in bathing suits. It was a kind of competition for them, Rudia explained. Having mastered the wyvern, she triumphantly climbed onto its head, and satisfied with this, placed her hands on her hips like a master. I don't know what exactly they are talking about, whether it's taking a bath or endurance competitions, but it's all part of elven culture, the goddess said carefreely. I think you should try it too, one of the elves supported Rudia. Besides everything else, it is good for health and beauty, the second added. Well, our customer base has already grown significantly, so why not add a sauna to the hot springs? The young man supported everyone gathered. Yes, that would be wonderful, the princess immediately came to life. To refresh themselves after the sauna, the elves also took an additional swim in the cool lake. There couldn't be anything better than that, she added dreamily. Wait, before you indulge in dreams, you first need to make sure that it is possible to build a sauna at Kuzuka, the young man said worriedly. The elves were overjoyed to receive permission to build the sauna and were incredibly happy. And since they knew what the sauna was, Alt decided to make the elves responsible for its construction. So the young man determined that Tio would be the sauna manager. He had barely managed to voice this when he was immediately interrupted by the worried Kuzuha's cry. After a long run, she could not catch her breath, and only after a few minutes was she able to say that the hot springs had been captured by a salamander. "We can't do business like this," Kuzuka screamed with horror and the last of her strength, transmitting her panic to everyone gathered. This was a huge problem for her, at least because even she was unable to bathe in her own hot springs. When they reached the place, they saw how Jane tried to enter first but failed, as he was immediately thrown back by the burning steam. Seeing his master, he tried to briefly explain what had happened. Wanting to fulfill his duty, he tried to defeat this monster. The swordsman began to justify himself, but he was interrupted by a baby salamander that crawled out from under the rubble of the mission, hot steam emanating from its body, which did not allow Jane to approach the monster. The baby was happy that he had finally found a warm place and had no intention of giving it up to anyone. In an attempt to defeat the monster, Rin decided to attack it using the absolute freezing that Princess Tio had taught her to use. And so it would seem the monster was successfully frozen. Those around were only struck by the sharp temperature change when suddenly, the mountain of ice created by Rin's magic shattered into many pieces, but did not cause the slightest damage to the baby salamander. The hot steam turned into flames that could spread to the hot springs in at any moment, which scared Kuzuha even more. While she tried to put out the flames, Rin mourned her ice magic. Seeing the sorceress's pitiful state, Tio tried to console her, and Alt decided that it was time to act. They had to try to tame the salamander. With these thoughts, he turned to the monster. He clearly liked this place, and that was why he resisted so desperately. Hot springs are underground waters heated by part of the Earth's crust, and for salamanders, this was indeed an ideal habitat. The young tamer tried to bribe the monster with better living conditions, promising that if he moved even a little from this place, he would receive the hot breath of the dragon every day. However, the salamander was not convinced by such arguments, and he became even more inflamed, not wanting to submit to the man. Alt realized with horror that the taming had failed, but then she came to their aid. Guessing that the steam did not belong to Kuzuha, she explained that she had originally only looked for the master because she had finished working on his sword. "Verena, now is not the right time for his presentation," the young man called out to her. "Now they need to figure out how to lure the salamander out of there." Seeing the little monster, the goddess of blacksmithing couldn't help but smile. Despite its destructive power, it was too cute. "Would you like to take him as a pet later?" Verena asked, pointing hopefully at the lovely creature. "If it works out, then yes," the young man answered hesitantly. While they were discussing it, the salamander began to act and its steam became even thicker, blocking the entire view of both people and gods. Alt was unable to tame this creature, and what's more, he couldn't even talk to it. Verena then decided to take matters into her own hands and eagerly reached for the sword. Hein decided to warn her not to get too close to the monster, lest it burn her. Determination filled her as the goddess pulled the master's blade from its sheath, deciding that he wouldn't mind borrowing it for a while. Fearlessly throwing herself into the flames, after a while she realized that it did not burn, and putting all her strength into the blow, that the creature had definitely listened to her master. The goddess swung her sword. With her attack, she literally cut through the flames, completely dispersing them and opening a passage to the salamander. The swordsman and the tamer rejoiced, glad that the steam had finally cleared. And the dissatisfied little monster, leaning on his hind legs, spat out a huge fiery sphere at the goddess. While the swordsman was angry and panicking, Tio decided to freeze the fire projectile. And Verena, seeing the worry on their faces, the goddess asked them to just trust her, instantly cutting the fire sphere. Princess Tio then froze the pieces before they could reach her, and they fell to the ground with a dull thud, and a goddess loomed over the salamander, confidently clutching a sword in her hands. "Now you are ready to listen to us?" Alt asked the monster with a conciliatory smile, and he could no longer refuse. That same day, a sauna was built and Ludia was already sitting in it, sweating profusely. Perhaps her state was shared by everyone present there now, well, of course, except for the satisfied elves and Verena. Now the young man understood what a sauna was, and despite the fact that he was already sweating heavily, he did not stop smiling. The goblin's body was burning, as was the swordsman's body, but he did not plan to give up so early. One of the elves looked down at him, grinning, making Hein wonder what he had done to deserve this. Unable to bear the heat, Ludia was the first to leave the sauna, and she hurried to quickly plunge into the cool pool, which was built near the sauna due to the lack of a lake nearby. "How nice it is," Ludia stretched contentedly in the water. Alt, who was already at his limit, came out and doused himself with cool water. Seeing him, Kuzuha asked him to tell the goddess of fertility that before jumping into the pool she should have sweated well. Everyone else also plunged into the ice pool, including Princess Tio, who added ice cubes to it. Standing in the pool, she continued to pour cold water over herself. After thinking for a while, she decided to dive into the pool head first, and after her, the young man and the swordsman somersaulted into it. Only the dissatisfied Kyuzuha shouted at them that jumping into the pool was prohibited. But this is elven culture. The princess smiled disarmingly at her. The other elves also supported her. Verena satisfied after the spa procedures, Kyuzuha asked her why she did not go to the pool with the others. It turned out that it was too cold for her there, and the goddess asked if she could take a simple shower instead. Having had a good rest, Alt decided to visit Salamander. He was interested in whether she liked her new house. What the monster liked most was that the new home was designed so that the warmth would never leave it. So the salamander was more than satisfied. The young man also wanted to thank the creature for helping to make the elf's dream come true. The monster also enjoyed such work. Verena joined their conversation. She was also happy that everything had worked out. Hearing praise from the master, who believed that everything had become possible only thanks to her, she began to deny everything in embarrassment. To top it all off, Alt asked the goddess to take care of this child, teaching him to control his flame. And she, with incredible enthusiasm and joy from getting a new job, decided to squeeze out of the salamander for the master everything possible. Their conversation was interrupted by a dissatisfied cry from Ludia, who was overcome with jealousy the moment she saw their communication, which, in her opinion, was too close. The fact that she is slim and beautiful does not mean that you can exchange her for me, she continued, becoming more and more angry with the young man with each passing minute. That's it, that's why you can't be left alone. Alt tried to justify himself, but no matter what he said, it just couldn't reach the ears of the angry goddess. At the same time, Namakel, accompanied by mercenaries, stood in front of the entrance to the dungeon. However, the dungeon was not simple, but the very one in which the demon king Belphegor slept, awaiting resurrection. He still couldn't bring himself to enter the dark womb of the dungeon, which opened up before him as if it wanted to swallow him whole. Allowing himself to laugh, the leader of the mercenaries, nicknamed the Dark Crows, tried to assure the Lord that they would certainly protect him. Except for the Grand Master, all of the subordinates wore masks, making it impossible to distinguish their faces. One of them approached him, worried about the high level of danger in this dungeon, and suggested that he visit Alta Village before entering to double all of his skills in the hot springs. The answer was silence and a needle that instantly pierced his throat. The Grandmaster wanted this scene to be a lesson to the other mercenaries. We should not use this village as a base. Have you forgotten what a contract is? He asked his subordinates in a terrifyingly quiet voice. We don't need anyone to say anything that will undermine our client's trust, he concluded. Pleased that he finally had a person who could appreciate his abilities, Namakel decided that even if he died, his older brother would take care of him. Although this time he would definitely be able to tame the most powerful dragon demon. Let's get in there quickly, the Lord, filled with anticipation of victory, urged everyone else. Then, as if by magic, a swordsman appeared among the treetops, blocking their way. He was wondering if there were any who wanted to enter the dungeon with permission from Mr. Alt. Namakel couldn't believe his eyes. A painfully familiar adventurer stood before him, while Ernst, seeing his old acquaintance, took on an even more serious look. It was you, His Excellency the Count, who decided to make sure of his suspicions. The swordsman and the Lord were overcome with rage. Because of your complaint, I was banned from the guild. You know how difficult it was for me. Namakel spat out every word indignantly. You got what you deserved, the adventurer answered him with a little irritation. The guild rules do not allow customers to mistreat performers. But first of all, was it possible to forgive your baseness towards my sister? Now the young man's slight irritation was turning into rage. Remembering the innocent face of that simpleton, the Lord burst into laughter. Ha! If you give me your sister right now, then we will let you go and spare your miserable life, Namakel continued confidently. Hearing this, all of Ernst's irritation instantly disappeared. In front of him stood a man who had long since sunk to the very bottom. He decided to enlighten him and told him that he and his sister now served the Lord of Silesia. Only now did Namakel realize that he was in his brother's domain, and that the man standing before him served him. According to the law established by Alt, if the Lord and his companions had no intentions against the Count of Silesia, then they should have followed Ernst. Anyone who attempts to enter the dungeon without the permission of the owner of these lands will be fined 50,000 gold. Then the offender will be deported. The swordsman would be grateful if the uninvited guests left on their own, and naturally, he was not going to give his sister to this rude man. Laughing again, Namakel asked Ernst if he really believed that anyone would follow the laws written by his brother. And calling the dark ravens to him, he invited them to prove themselves here and now, confident in advance of their victory. One of the mercenaries recognized the famous adventurer, the magic swordsman. A terrifying smile appeared on the faces of the others. They all eagerly awaited the start of the battle. Show him all your strength, the Lord ordered. The mercenaries, like a pack of wild dogs, all rushed at the swordsman at once, but he remained unshaken and without unnecessary haste began to prepare for the inevitable fight. The first two approached him and tried to attack from two sides at once, but they were unable to even touch Ernst. The third, deciding that the swordsman was distracted by the other two mercenaries, quietly approached him from behind. Suddenly, he got tangled in the adventurer's cloak, so much so that he couldn't see anything from underneath it. Noticing the unlucky attacker in time, Ernst intercepted him and knocked him out with a direct blow to the stomach. Immediately another one rushed at him, from whose blow the adventurer also managed to dodge. Having made the maneuver, the mercenary, rejoicing at the return of luck, lost his vigilance and opened himself up, when he realized that the next blow would be his last. Despite such a strong blow, he was able to stay on his feet and, jumping back a bladeless distance, launched many deadly needles at Ernst. In the eyes of those around, everything happened as if by magic. It seemed that Ernst dissolved into thin air for a few seconds, and all the needles that were thrown at him remained in the tree. Having repelled the attack, the swordsman caused the third mercenary to lose consciousness, which enraged Namakel. He demanded that the Grand Master do something, not just stand there and watch them fail, but remain completely calm. Disappear, he suddenly shouted loudly, which scared the adventurer a little. And grabbing the Lord, who didn't understand anything, by the chest, he sent him on a short flight. At full speed, he flew face first into a tree and lost consciousness from severe pain. Having looked at the unlucky Lord, Ernst pulled out one of the needles from the tree that had been thrown at him not long ago, and strengthening his blow by calling on the wind, launched it into the back of the fleeing mercenary. As soon as he collapsed, Ernst looked at the battlefield inside. That's why it would be better if they left in peace, he couldn't help but think. At that moment, goblins appeared from the forest with a cart, coming to the adventurer's rescue. Smiling at his friends, he hastened to reassure them by telling them that he had only had to use a little magic today. Soon all 5 offenders who were still unconscious were bound hand and foot. Not far from them sat Namakel, offended by the whole world, who kept cursing at everyone in a row, believing that if he had not been stopped, he would have tamed the dragon in the dungeon long ago. Intrigued by the incredible resemblance between the offender and his master, the goblin came closer to examine the scolding man. Ernst advised him not to pay attention to the Lord, their resemblance lay in their kinship. Since you did not follow my advice earlier and resisted arrest, your fine will increase to 500,000 gold. The swordsman announced the sentence to the count as calmly as possible. Naturally, Namakel did not have such an impressive sum with him. Then Ernst suggested that the count take off all his clothes and accessories, which would be returned to him after deportation. However, the Lord could not stop. His last threat was the assurance that after taming the dragon, he would marry the princess and become king. Then this impudent adventurer and his sister would regret that they treated him like that. The goblin was astonished by the level of ambition in such a weak man, both physically and morally, and Ernst felt ashamed. Wanting to finally put the count in his place, the swordsman told him that Lord Alt already controlled 5 wyverns and a behemoth. Isn't his master perfect for the role of the princess's groom? The swordsman finished off the puzzled lord. Namakel couldn't believe it. How could his brother not only tame a behemoth but also control 5 wyverns? Was that even possible? The money received will go to the development of Silesia. Turning away from the Lord who had already become quite boring to him, Ernst continued. He will continue to do everything possible to benefit his master. While he was speaking, 2 goblins approached the count and asked him to give them the clothes without any resistance. Only now, fully realizing the hopeless situation he was in, Namakel decided to submit, shaking with rage every moment. Having already annoyed the goblins carrying him in the cart with his incessant swearing, the Lord suddenly turned to one of them. Apparently remembering his high status, he again began to brazenly order them to quickly take him to the right place and immediately release him, since he was still tied up. Trying to make their fellow traveler shut up for at least a little while, the goblins decided to tell him about the wyverns standing at the edge of the forest and about the thunder lions. These monsters could easily eat such a weak tamer. Be grateful that we are carrying you, one of the goblins could not stand it. Yes, if you were not our master's younger brother, everything would be completely different, the second supported his friend. You've been telling me this from the start, the Lord said with even greater displeasure. However, it's not surprising that lower-ranking monsters are helping him, he continued. Tired of endless reproaches, the goblins decided to leave the Lord to be eaten by stronger monsters, and turning around to Namakel's dismay, began to move away towards the forest. The young man's attempts to justify himself were cut short, as they had already reached the city gates and their departure was a mere farce. Seeing them from afar, the guard greeted the goblins. Having brought the offender to the guard, they asked him to take care of him. Despite the surprise, he of course agreed. but he became interested in who exactly they brought to their gates. This man is not very smart, so he tried to enter the Demon King's dungeon without permission and began to explain the Goblin Guard without much interest. Deciding that this was his chance for salvation, Namekal shouted his official title at the top of his lungs, and he demanded that they immediately prepare for him clothing, food, and drink appropriate to his position. He also ordered the immediate execution of all goblins for not showing him due respect. None of those present attached much importance to his efforts. The goblin told the guard that their fellow traveler was talkative and sometimes began to shout like that. After apologizing, the intern explained to Mr. Nameklu that criminals who do not comply with the laws of Silesia cannot be treated with respect. "What do you mean?" the Lord asked in amazement. "We saw that the entrance to the dungeon is controlled to prevent the Demon King from being resurrected, and we agree with this law and intend to help," the guard answered without hesitation. "Also, Mr. Alt saved our city from the Thunder Lions. We can provide you with both food and clothing, but we will not satisfy any other request of yours," the guard said firmly, then asked to lend the prisoner work clothes. Namekal wanted to pour out all his dissatisfaction on the assembled people again, but he was interrupted. If he didn't need the clothes now, he could return them. Putting on rags, the Lord continued to shower the guards with threats. Without unnecessary emotion, they advised him to contact the royal palace on such issues. Deciding to bid farewell to the guards, the goblin extended his hand to one of them. It would be wonderful if they could ride on a flying carriage on the way. However, not wanting to let the guests go so early, they were offered to have dinner. While the goblins rejoiced at the sudden invitation, Namekal tried to understand what they meant by the flying carriage. Suddenly, 3 adventurers who had just arrived at the city gates joined the conversation. After greeting everyone gathered, one of them suggested that they try meat for lunch. His gaze accidentally fell on a tied-up man, whose appearance seemed familiar to the adventurer. Grabbing the captive lord by the shoulder, he decided to find out if he was by chance their old acquaintance, the Count of Austin. The others also approached the Lord, who had already managed to get quite scared and did not understand what was happening. They were another group that had bad luck with their client. Because of Namekal, they were banned from the city capital. While he was suffering from the failed reunion, Alt woke up to find a contented Ludia standing next to him. And Rurina, who went on a journey, by coincidence found herself captured. The morning sun, having illuminated the room, gradually reached Alt's eyes, trying to wake him up. However, he only yawned and turned over onto his other side. Feeling someone's closeness, the young man opened his eyes in surprise to find a gun peacefully snoring next to him. Because of the intense gaze, she had to wake up too. He couldn't understand what she was doing in his bed, but the goddess wasn't at all embarrassed by such closeness. And really, what's surprising about spouses sleeping together? Alt asked her not to invade his personal space like that again, but she did not listen to his arguments and took out an expensive-looking mineral from her kimono, saying that it was some kind of bonus. After carefully examining the crystal, the young man recognized it as a sacred stone and was delighted. Then Rudia magically pulled out 9 more of the same, which meant that he could now spin the gacha twice. Double scrolling will increase the chance of getting a SR rank goddess, the young man asked the goddess with hope. She nodded in agreement. The more you spin the gacha, the more likely it is that you'll get a ranked goddess. Even without paying, you can play 10 times in a row and get 1 SSR god. Alt thought with a smile that he had been waiting for this for 10 days and put all the sacred stones in the drawer of the table. Playing 10 times in a row would be great, of course, but then he would have to wait 2 months, he thought sadly. He was pulled out of his thoughts by Rudia, who was eager to begin the summoning again. She decided to pray fervently for their future success, but then decided that she still needed to have breakfast before starting. After some time, they stood at the summoning gate again. Yes, spinning gacha without giving money is great. The young man should be grateful to her because this was only possible because she loved him. Having paid for 2 spins, the alt also involuntarily felt excited and decided that most likely Rudia had infected him with this. Suddenly, a glowing roller appeared, which the young man wanted to take in his hands, but it emitted too bright a glow. It depicted a Titan soldier of rank R. This card raised the rank of the last weapon of the gods, which Alt already had, to the 3rd, which made the robotic defender incredibly happy. The system window also announced that the Titan warrior had improved and gained the skill Monster Search. New skill, the young man exclaimed in amazement. Monster Search allowed them to be detected within a radius of up to 5 kilometers. Whom the Titan card came up twice, the goddess said thoughtfully, carefully peering into the system window. She hugged Alt and congratulated him on surpassing his limit. When you get the same god that you already have, she continued, all of his stats improve several times, and along with that, you gain new skills. Since you got the Titan twice, you got a new skill, concluded Rudia, pleased with her new acquisition. but suddenly she noticed that the young man did not share her joy. To be completely honest, he would have preferred to get a new comrade, Alt admitted innocently. The upset Titan could not understand why his master was not happy, and the reason was quite simple. Even several R ranks cannot be equal in strength to SSR ranks. Trying to reassure his friends, he smiled, pretending to be happy with such an acquisition. But you can't fool yourself. The young man chose to improve the Bahamut to the maximum level, but how many sacred stones would it take? While Alt was lamenting the strictness of the gacha system, the robot was lamenting the fact that he had upset his master. However, Verena suddenly addressed him and the goddess. She asked them to go with her to the permit office, because the adventurers were having problems there. The permit office was a tent from which disgruntled voices were heard every now and then. The middle-aged man demanded to call the chief, already quite irritated by the fact that he listened to neither the administrator nor himself. Hein told him that he should be glad that he had received permission to conduct reconnaissance in principle, having a C rank. The adventurer insisted that since he had gone to the hot spring, he now had the right to have the status of an A-rank adventurer, showing off his mithril sword to the others, which he believed could defeat anyone. Having such a weapon only added to his self-confidence. Mithril, Verena said with annoyance, and Alt tried to calm the man down. The Demon King's dungeon was S-rank and teeming with monsters. That's why they couldn't let just anyone in there. Introducing himself as the head of the village, the young man asked him to voluntarily give it up, without creating unnecessary conflicts. However, the man did not heed his requests and offered a bet. If he defeated the young man, he would have to give him permission. Standing up, Gain asked the seeker to watch his tongue, but he was no longer interested in him. Deciding that it would be unfair if he only got something if he won, he put his mithril sword on the line. Alt thought about it and agreed, reminding him that in addition to losing his sword, the man would also not be allowed to enter the dungeon. Anticipating a quick victory with faith in his strength and his sword, this boar rushed at the young man, who only managed to grab the hilt of the sword. As soon as he pulled the sword out of its sheath, the man was immediately thrown back by a shock wave, which, among other things, passed through a massive wall of logs. Before he could fully comprehend his defeat, his hands involuntarily loosened their grip and the mithril sword fell from them, which was immediately caught by Verena. Blaming his weak sword for his defeat, the man pounded his fists on the ground. However, he should have been thinking about how to become stronger himself, Alt thought. Looking at the wall cut through with one blow, the young man began to worry about the strength of his sword. Suddenly, the adventurer said something about dark elves. Interested in what he heard, he asked the man about it again, who explained that he was going to defeat the dark elves so that they could not awaken the Demon King. Ludia was about to hint to the young man, but he himself had already guessed that it was time to use the new skill. And approaching the vast forest map, he activated the monster search. Right there on her in many places, red lights lit up. Such a skill was extremely convenient when searching for a specific monster. Looking at the map, Verena noticed with horror a cluster of dark elves in one place, and the most terrible thing was that it was too close to their village. Alt ordered people to be sent there for reconnaissance. Realizing the gravity of the situation they were now in, no one could take their eyes off the map. At the same time, in a dark dungeon, chained to the wall, Ririna, who had gone on an errand from Count Austin to Silesia with a horse-drawn carriage, could not understand why this had happened to her. She just wanted to see Mr. Alt again, and when she was almost there, a magician appeared in front of the carriage. And before she could scream, the carriage was destroyed, and the maid was already in the icy prison for a long time.